Chapter 80. A Magical Cemetery. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. Han Shuo fell onto solid ground, regained his footing, and took his bearings. He was in a large laboratory. All sorts of containers and large bones were placed everywhere. Several gloomy lights, like green wool.wisps, were placed on the walls on the side, lighting up the interior, making it slightly brighter. There were also a few rooms in the four corners. Han Shuo went into each of the rooms and discovered that two of them were filled with all sorts of books having to do with necromancy magic, and included a few books on dark magic as well. The books in here were obviously all very old. There was a lot of dust on them, and the number of books greatly exceeded the number of books in the dark studies section of the library in the academy. Many of them were also books that Han Shuo had never heard of. Magical supplies were stored in the other four rooms. Each of the containers were sealed tightly and were filled with colorful liquid, with some holding strange bones and teeth of vicious beasts that sparkled with light. Just as Han Shuo was taking measure of his surroundings, the round, green ball in his hand suddenly sent out an eye-dazzling flash of green splendor. The light encompassed the entire laboratory as a black shadow like a ghost suddenly materialized in one of the circular magical symbols within the laboratory. My child, when you arrive here and see this mirror image, I will have already returned to dust. If you seek to understand everything about the cemetery of death, then you must pay attention and listen to all that I have to say. The black shadow was a concentrated mass, whether it was his eyes or the light from the round, green ball. Han Shuo was unable to see its original form. An unpracticed voice slowly formed each word with a bit of difficulty. Han Shuo was shocked and then immediately realized that this was a way that mages left messages, mirror images. According to the meaning of the words, Han Shuo hastily focused his concentration and listened to every sentence he was saying. First, you must know that the cemetery of death was the sacred ground of necromancers during my time. It represents the peak of necromancy magic. The cemetery of death can move. When you finally grasp all that is present here, you will find that you own a frightening city. The wispy voice explained ceaselessly. Han Shuo concentrated and listened to the voice's slow descriptions. When the voice said, "You will still be able to see me on the next level," the black shadow suddenly disappeared as well. Apart from the magic matrix above grounds in the cemetery of death, there were two more levels apart from the laboratory and library on this level. In order to fully grasp all the secrets of the cemetery of death, he must travel to the two lower levels as well. Han Shuo had gained this understanding from the black shadow that the cemetery of death was actually a castle that could move, and it was an incredibly powerful castle. This greatly shocked Han Shuo. The round, green ball was equivalent to a key to enter the cemetery of death. The evil mental brand of a necromancer was held within. If an ordinary person obtained this round ball, they would be unable to escape the corruption of the ball and would finally turn into a senseless zombie, apart from necromancers with the feel of necromancy magic about them. Although Han Shuo was just a magic apprentice, he still had the presence of necromancy magic about him and thus thankfully hadn't been assimilated by the curse, but because he had brashly explored when his mental strength had been too weak, he would have been hard-pressed to escape death that day if it weren't for the help of the magical yuan. The amazing magical yuan was different from all energy of this world. It had actually saved Han Shuo when his mind was being invaded by the mental strength, and had bafflingly helped Han Shuo increase his mental strength. Han Shuo had reaped great rewards in the midst of inhumane pain. This was probably something that the creator of the round, green ball had never imagined. From the depictions of the black shadow, Han Shuo received limited information. It seemed that a more in-depth explanation existed in the lower two levels. Han Shuo mused silently for a bit, and then re-entered the rooms that were full of magic books. The magic books were the essence of necromancy magic, the product of a time when necromancy magic was at its peak. These were true priceless treasures to Han Shuo. The academy already had quite a number of books, but books truly dealing with necromancy magic weren't that many. Most of them only dealt with beginner or journeyman topics, and ones that dealt with more advanced necromancy magic were exceedingly few. He flipped through the books covered with thick dust in the 2 rooms. Han Shuo had to sigh in admiration. The magical books here were much more superior compared to the ones at the academy, whether in terms of quality or quantity. 3 of them were called Necromancy Magic, divided into upper, middle, and lower scrolls. They were placed in the most eye-catching place and had obviously received special treatment. They were placed in a magical container and still looked quite new. They probably wouldn't be damaged even in tens of thousands of years. The upper scroll of Necromancy Magic was already quite thick. Han Shuo discovered that it recorded, in detail, everything from the beginning of necromancy magic to the true essence of necromancy magic. The knowledge held within was quite different from what was taught by the academy. Much of the necromancy knowledge and magics recorded were those that Han Shuo had never heard of. There were handwritten notes on every page starting from the middle scroll, providing detailed footnotes to the content on the page, but it looked like the 3 scrolls were of one entity. When Han Shuo read the middle and lower scroll, he still couldn't understand some of the knowledge within even with the aid of the notes. Han Shuo could just barely understand the first half of the upper scroll, but unfortunately, without the presence of handwritten notes, Han Shuo still felt it very difficult to understand. Perhaps the person who had prepared this set of magical books had felt that people wouldn't need notes to understand the upper scroll, and that's why he didn't leave any explanations. After thinking for a while, Han Shuo decided to start with the first scroll. He planned on using this complete set of necromancy magic as his textbooks and slowly study and train from them. After forming his determination, Han Shuo took the round ball and departed from this level, returning to the surface level. He wasn't affected by the boundary and began to study this scroll, foregoing meals and forgetting to sleep. Han Shuo was preoccupied with this scroll of necromancy magic for many days in a row, understanding all the words inside by studying every word. From this set of necromancy magic, Han Shuo understood that the knowledge and spells currently taught at the academy were much more shallow than the explanations in the books. There were many evil magics that Han Shuo would be unable to learn from Fanny. Corpse reanimation was a basic kind of necromancy magic. It used necromancy magic to turn those who had died into zombies, and would start fighting according to the caster's will. If mental strength was sufficient enough, a terrifying zombie army could be reanimated. Canopy of Necromancy was another evil magic. As long as Canopy of Necromancy was released, the battle strength and agility of dark creatures would be greatly increased beneath the coverage of the canopy, and the enemy would have difficulty adjusting to this area spell, decreasing their battle strength. Numerous spells similar to Corpse Reanimation and Canopy of Necromancy were listed within the scroll. It was said that these magics had been lost for a long time and none of the necromancers today could grasp them, but there were detailed descriptions within this scroll of necromancy magic. Han Shuo understood that he had picked up a precious treasure. If this scroll of necromancy magic was circulated, then it could possibly immediately change the current condition of necromancers, noticeably increasing the level of the necromancer's strength. The terror of necromancers would then once again materialize. He studied for nearly 10 days, either meditating or studying the scroll of necromancy magic. Corpse reanimation was a basic spell, but unfortunately Han Shuo had no corpses to practice on. Canopy of Necromancy was an advanced spell. Han Shuo was equally unable to practice it because he lacked the mental strength to do so. But through his practice during this time, Han Shuo mastered the bone spear magic. Even the zombie summoning spell was almost at hand, but he met with some resistance when communicating with the other dimension. After calculating the time, it was about time that the demon's lair edge was complete. Han Shuo thought for a bit and left the cemetery of death with the small skeleton, carefully evading a few level 3 and above magical creatures. He hunted a few low-level monsters and took them with him, once again walking to the dwarves' village. Midway there, just when Han Shuo was about to enter the dwarves' village, he heard the sound of weapons clashing. Han Shuo was greatly shocked and picked up his speed, threading through the trees and bushes with the little skeleton and rushing towards the source of the sounds. A couple dozen man-eating monsters and almost 100 goblins were wielding weapons and besieging the dwarves. The dwarves held brand new weapons in their hands, and were so much sharper compared to the ones that the man-eating monsters and goblins were using. The goblins in particular were using a few crude blades and wooden sticks, breaking into many pieces whenever they clashed with the dwarves. It was the superiority of their weapons that had enabled the vastly outnumbered dwarves to defend until now. The dwarf village was behind them not too far away, and women and children with no fighting ability were there. For the safety of the village, they couldn't even retreat into the village in case they exposed the village and endangered the women and children. Han Shuo took in this scene and immediately became enraged. His crossbow had already appeared in his hand as he ran, and several crossbow bolts broke through the air with a whistling sound, shooting down a man-eating monster and 2 goblins. The little skeleton seemed to sense Han Shuo's anger from the depths of his heart and flew towards the front. The 7-bone spurs on its back shot in all directions, and lines of blood appeared on the bodies of these man-eating monsters and goblins after ear-piercing sounds rang out. "Oh, it's Han. He's here." Bennett, who was hoisting up an iron club and surrounded by 5 or 6 goblins, when he suddenly saw Han Shuo's figure and exclaimed in surprise. Like a wolf entering a herd of sheep, the arrival of Han Shuo and the little skeleton immediately heralded a slaughter. The little skeleton was particularly fierce. Its 7-bone spurs danced amongst the crowd of man-eating monsters and goblins, causing injuries and fatalities to them. After Han Shuo had arrived, he first summoned a few skeletal warriors, and they all wielded bone daggers as they dashed towards these villains. Han Shuo himself rather held his ground and targeted the man-eating monster and goblins who had died, beginning to release the spell of corpse reanimation. After failing a few times, Han Shuo still continued to remain where he stood and repeatedly chanted the incantation, under the surprised looks of the dwarves, attempting to make the bodies, who had just lost their lives, rise again. Finally, an ugly goblin with a crossbow bolt still sticking out of its chest suddenly stood up after Han Shuo cast his spell. It grabbed a metal club and tottered over, starting to attack the goblin next to him that was still alive. With one success under his belt, Han Shuo calmly recalled the steps he had just taken when casting and once again cast a corpse reanimation spell. He succeeded once again. It was a man-eating monster this time. Under the release of Han Shuo's corpse reanimation spell, another 5 or 6 man-eating monsters and goblins stood up, raising their weapons in accordance with Han Shuo's commands and starting to attack the living man-eating monsters and goblins. When the man-eating monsters and goblins discovered this phenomenon, this immediately caused a strong wave of terror and panic to spread amongst them. These man-eating monsters and goblins were shocked out of their wits seeing their dead companions stand up vacantly and attack them. Saying a few sentences in their own language and pointing at Han Shuo in fright, all of them scattered like the 4 winds as they fled for their lives. Even the dwarves on the side felt a bit of fear. They all looked at Han Shuo with exceedingly odd looks, different from those they looked at him usually. Han Shuo blanked and then immediately reacted. He dissolved his spell and the dead man-eating monsters and goblins fell down once again. "Han, this magic of yours is too evil. Even we are a bit afraid." Bennett walked towards Han Shuo and spoke haltingly. Han Shuo knew that the spell of corpse reanimation was indeed quite evil, and ordinary people would be unable to accept it. He thought for a moment and nodded, saying, "Bennett, I understand what you mean, but I've done so in order to save all of you." "We understand, thank you Han. However, this kind of magic is truly hard to accept. Even the villainous man-eating monsters and goblins were scared witless by you. Heh, let's go. Your weapon is ready and we'll give it to you when we arrive at the village. You guys have finished it." Han Shuo was truly astonished upon hearing that the demon's lair edge was ready. He brought up the rear and walked towards the dwarf village. The little skeleton's 7-bone spurs reattached to its spine and didn't head for the dwarf village along with Han Shuo. Rather, it followed Han Shuo's orders and looted the bodies of the dead with a practiced air. Following Calvin, Han Shuo came to the dwarf village and arrived at the site where the demon's lair edge was crafted. Han, this is the weapon that we've forged according to your requirements. Are you satisfied with it? Bennett pointed with the hammer in his hand at a weapon on the side as he spoke to Han Shuo. The demon's lair edge was 2 feet long, and a cold light sparkled along its keen edge. The body was dark brown with 3 raised thorns at the spiky tip. It was heavy in his hand. Han Shuo held the demon's lair edge and carefully observed it, suddenly stabbing the whetstone beneath it. The demon's lair edge sank into the whetstone. Nodding, Han Shuo looked at the somewhat uneasy Calvin in satisfaction. He smiled, "Elder, thank you for your crafting. I really like this weapon." "Heh, as long as you like it. This weapon has black iron and black gold mixed in as well as more than 10 rare metals. I'm also very satisfied with this weapon." Calvin breathed a sigh of relief and looked at the demon's lair edge as he spoke. "Be on the alert, man-eating monster and goblins may appear again during this period of time. I will leave for a while and will bring your winter rations with me next time I visit. Make sure to take care." After reminding these dwarves, Han Shuo eagerly returned to the cemetery of death, circulating the magic within his body. He used the essence of his blood as a circuit to the demon's lair edge, refining the weapon for the next 3 days and 3 nights according to the memories left behind by Chu Conglan. Han Shuo's blood was intermixed with magical yuan as it slowly flowed into the demon's lair edge. After 3 days, Han Shuo was drained and worn out and felt that his magical yuan was running dry. The originally dark brown demon's lair edge had turned dark red. After Han Shuo's magical yuan recovered over the next couple of days, he started practicing the law of activating magic with the demon's lair edge, attempting to manipulate the weapon with his mind. During this process, the meridians of Han Shuo's body would occasionally swell painfully. Han Shuo still gritted his teeth against the enormous impact of the waterfall on this day, continuously using magical yuan to refine the meridians in his body. He suddenly sank into a mental state. Under unbeknownst circumstances, Han Shuo slowly woke up. He discovered that at some unknown time, he had already fallen into the deep pool. When he emerged from the frigid waters of the deep pool, he suddenly discovered that the demon's lair edge had disappeared. Startled, he wanted to quickly find the demon's lair edge again. At this moment, a dark red light suddenly shot out from the waters and flew towards Han Shuo. Han Shuo had thought danger had found him and was planning on evading it when he realized that a bizarre feeling had risen in his heart. It was as if the dark red light shooting towards him had some sort of connection to him. He first blanked, and then a thought flashed through his mind. Suddenly enlightened, Han Shuo's thoughts moved. The dark red light shooting towards him suddenly started dancing in mid-air. Han Shuo then sensed a fish in the waters of the pool and a thought bubbled up in his mind. The fish was instantaneously pierced through by the demon's lair edge. It looks like I've succeeded. Han Shuo's left hand reached out and the demon's lair edge shot out from the waters, landing in Han Shuo's palm. Circulating his magical yuan, the speed of the mystical glacial spell fire was many times faster than usual. Han Shuo was shocked again, and then suddenly discovered that traces of frosty air was leaking out from the demon's lair edge, held in his left hand with the mystical glacial air being infused into it. Because the demon's lair edge was pointed at the deep pool, a layer of ice had already formed on the surface of the pool as the waters gave off frigid air. He knew that these were the signs of having broken through the open passages and reaching the molded spirit realm. Han Shuo was gratified to know that after a few life and death struggles and several sleepless nights of magic training, he had finally once again achieved a breakthrough. Han Shuo's magic had once again improved now, and a most excellent demon's lair edge was now in his hands. Han Shoa felt that it was time to leave the Cemetery of Death and thoroughly eliminate the threat known as Grover. Walking out from the tombs in the mountains behind the academy, Han Shoa didn't immediately find Phoebe. Han Shoa harbored feelings of affection towards Fanny. He had planned on asking her a few questions on magical knowledge after their last meeting, but it was a pity that he had received the black gold ore from Phoebe and had eagerly returned to the Cemetery of Death. The upper scroll of necromancy magic contained much knowledge that Han Shoa did not fully understand. This scroll didn't have many notes. As an adept mage, Fanny was bound to have a more in-depth understanding. Therefore, Han Shoa had long since noted the topics he didn't understand and wanted to find a chance to ask Fanny again. The Babylon Academy of Magic and Force had an exalted position within the empire. Although Grover hated Han Shoa's guts, he wouldn't dare brazenly make a move against Han Shoa on school grounds. The teachers of various majors were all quite strong. Apart from the necromancy major, the other majors had even more stronger characters acting as overseers. Even if the killers of Shadow Ghost came looking for him, it was impossible for them to leave alive once they had been discovered. It was now dusk and the students were now relaxing or eating meals after a day of learning. Han Shoa didn't directly go look for Fanny at her lab, afraid that this would attract the attention of others. He waited a while until the sky had completely darkened, before walking to the small building that Fanny lived in without anyone knowing. Han Shoa had stayed in the necromancy major for so long and had long since learned of where Fanny lived because of his feelings for her. He skillfully deciphered the appropriate direction under the cover of the night, walking to the teacher dormitory building in which Fanny resided. Chapter 81. Caught in the act in bed. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Fanny's quarters bordered those of some other female dark major teachers. However, there was still a bit of a distance between them. His sensitive perceptions could clearly hear voices in low conversation from within the teacher's dormitory building. It looked like they had yet to go to sleep at this time. All of the teachers at the Babylon Academy were extraordinarily strong. When Han Shoa neared, he purposefully concealed his presence and even slowed down the rate of his heartbeat. Just as Han Shoa arrived in front of Fanny's door and was about to reach out and knock, the door suddenly opened. Fanny was wearing silk pajamas and an expanse of snow-white skin showed at her chest. She was wearing the ruby necklace that Han Shoa had given her, further displaying her beauty. "Brian, what are you doing here so surreptitiously?" Fanny was a bit unhappy as she looked at Han Shoa. Looking around, Han Shoa asked askance, "How did you know I was here?" "I felt that someone was following recently times and so became wary. I've cast life reconnaissance in front of the door so I discovered you as soon as you came over." Fanny rolled her eyes at Han Shoa and said in an ill temper upon seeing him cast shifty looks around the area. Master Fanny, can I come inside?" After all, it wasn't too convenient to stand and talk at the door. Add to this that several teachers had yet to go to sleep, it would be a bad thing if they were seen. Who knew that when Han Shoa spoke these words, Fanny's charming cheeks would flush faintly red? Fanny hesitated, then also stuck out her head to look around, finally dragging Han Shoa in with a red face and hastily closing the door. Han Shoa discovered the room was filled with the presence of femininity when he entered Fanny's room. Pink bed curtains, neat and clean tables and carpet, as well as some elegant decorations that demonstrated the female identity of this room's owner. A thought suddenly striking him, Han Shoa remembered that in his original world, ordinary young girls wouldn't easily let strangers into their rooms. The room of each girl was the window to her soul. One would be unable to enter without her acceptance. When his thoughts traveled here, ripples grew in Han Shoa's heart as he looked at Fanny with a hot gaze. "What are you looking at? Where have you been again the past couple days? There will be a test in half a month and you must participate, otherwise the school authorities have the power to expel you." Fanny glared at Han Shoa viciously upon seeing his hot and bothered glance, then seemed to think of something and turned her back to Han Shoa, taking off the ruby necklace from her snow-white neck. "I know. I've come to find you this time in order to ask you a few questions regarding magical knowledge. Why did you take the necklace off? I feel that you are very beautiful and moving when you wear this necklace. None of your business. It's already night now, I've taken the necklace off in order to prepare to rest. If you want to ask about magical knowledge, then come find me in the lab tomorrow during the day. It's already night, so it won't be too good if someone discovers that you're here. Fanny looked at Han Shuo, out of sorts. Footsteps sounded outside the door at this moment, and they had already arrived in front of Fanny's door within the blink of an eye. The door was knocked on twice as a female voice sounded, "Master Fanny, you're not asleep yet, can I come in?" It was truly that whatever one was worried about would happen. Fanny and Han Shuo looked at each other, their faces both stilling at once. Fanny then glared viciously at Han Shuo and then reached out with her hand to make a shushing motion. She opened her mouth to say, "Master Camilla, just a moment, I'll open the door for you shortly." After Fanny spoke, she suddenly started walking around in the room, her eyes patrolling over everywhere. It looked like she was trying to find a hiding spot for Han Shuo. Fanny's room wasn't too big, there didn't seem to be a place able to hide Han Shuo's entire body. In her anxiety, Fanny suddenly saw her room and pointed at it to Han Shuo, her charming face full of joy. Seeing that Fanny was so anxious, Han Shuo shrugged his shoulders and followed her wishes, standing up from the side of the table and walking towards her bed with the pink bed curtains. He hopped onto Fanny's bed with a whoosh, an expression of great enjoyment showing on his face. Having walked to the door, Fanny was about to open the door when she was extremely surprised after turning her head. Her mouth opened with no sound, her right hand pointed frantically at the bottom of the bed. It looked like she'd meant for Han Shuo to hide beneath the bed, but Han Shuo had gotten the wrong impression, actually already gotten on the bed that she'd never allowed strange males to touch before. "Master Fanny, hurry and open the door." Camilla stood in front of the door and could already see from the light that Fanny was at the door. She opened her mouth and hurried Fanny. Lying sideways on the bed, a wonderful fragrance wafted around him. Han Shuo ignored the anxious Fanny giving hints by the door and smiled as he undid the bed curtains, taking Fanny's nicely scented blankets and covering his body. Fanny gritted her teeth angrily with regards to Han Shuo's actions, but Camilla's continued hurrying in front of the door left Fanny no other choice but to open the room door and pretend to be calm. She smiled and responded, "Master Camilla, how come you've come to find me so late at night?" Camilla was an adept mage of the Dark Major and was already middle-aged. Her looks could only be described as ordinary. When she walked into Fanny's room, she automatically sat down next to the table and said, "Your necromancy major actually won out over the light major through the trials of the Dark Forest last time. This has given us a lot of faith. Our major will be heading out for our trials shortly. I'm here to ask you for tips and tricks." "What tips and tricks?" "Our major only managed to hunt down those magical creatures last time simply because we were lucky. Master Camilla, you've been in the Dark Major for many years and have taken the students out on many outings. You should be very experienced. I think you're asking the wrong person by coming to me." Fanny felt uncomfortable with Camilla in the room, deathly afraid that she would discover Han Shuo's presence. The more she worried, the more her gaze flitted to the edge of her bed. She continued to keep an eye on the movements on her bed, afraid that Han Shuo would emit some sounds and arouse Camilla's attentions. "Master Fanny's bed curtains are very pretty, where did you buy them?" Camilla suddenly stood up and unexpectedly walked towards Fanny's bed, her eyes staring at Fanny's bed curtains and an expression of extreme interest appeared on her face. Her heart shuddered as Fanny quickly closed the distance, arriving before Camilla and sat down to block the former's line of sight. Her spine ramrod straight, she hastily said, "From the Meyer Decorations shop. If Master Camilla likes them, then you can go buy them as well. 1 gold coin should be enough." Fanny's bed was not that big to begin with. Han Shuo was already flush against the wall as he lay on his side. In her hasty anxiousness, Fanny abruptly sat down on the bed and actually placed her butt on the back of Han Shua's left hand. When Fanny came to the end of her explanations to Camilla, her light, already explained that she also felt things were inappropriate. So you bought it from the Meyer decorations shop, no wonder it's so pretty. Too bad I'm old and not as pretty as Master Fanny. If I bought these curtains, I'll be sure to be ridiculed behind my back. Master Fanny's well-rounded bottom was sitting on the back of Han Shua's hand. Han Shua was feeling the wondrous sensation as his heart was like a capering monkey and his mind like a galloping horse. Just as he was enjoying the sensation, he suddenly felt that the wondrous sensation on the back of his hand was no longer there. Disappointment rose from Han Shua's heart as he carefully snuck a peek. He discovered that Fanny's body still remained in the same position, but had used the muscles of her waist to slightly lift her wonderful behind. The place where Fanny was sitting just happened to block Camilla's line of sight. If Fanny shifted her body, it was very likely that Han Shua would be discovered. Fanny clearly felt that she had sat in a place she shouldn't have sat in, yet couldn't move her body and could only lift her buttocks to avoid Han Shua taking advantage of her. Watching from the back, Han Shua could see a red flush creep up Fanny's neck, slender shoulders, and delectable back. Because she had tightened her body, Fanny's curves were fully on display and her well-rounded behind fell completely into Han Shua's view. Han Shua had no idea what Fanny and Camilla talked about afterwards. His lustful gaze roved greedily over Fanny's body. As a mage, it was very difficult for Fanny to maintain her position that was akin to a horse's stances. Her body started trembling after a while. Perhaps it was because she could no longer hold up, or felt that Han Shua should have moved his hand from the area. Fanny's body relaxed and her two-but cheeks dropped down as she once again sat down. Another light, emitted from Fanny's mouth. Han Shua had flipped his hand from the back to his palm facing up. His fingers curled vaguely from the pressure of Fanny's buttocks, curling into the space between them, immediately causing Fanny to cry out slightly as she couldn't bear up beneath it. Master Fanny, are you all right? Your face is so red and your body is trembling so. Are you sick? Let me take a look for you. No, nothing much. If you don't have any other matters, Master Camilla, why don't you leave? I'm tired and want to rest early. Fanny trembled as she tried to lift her but as she spoke, wanting to stand up from the edge of the bed. Han Shua had been enjoying the well-rounded, slippery sensation of Fanny's butt. When he lost that touch, he subconsciously reached out his hand and plunged into the area between Fanny's butt that she had just lifted up a tiny bit. Fanny had been about to stand up straight when her body suddenly spasmed because of the abrupt stimulus to her body. Her body once more sat down uncontrollably, swallowing Han Shua's rampaging left hand. What's wrong, Master Fanny? Something's dreadfully wrong with your body. Camilla said frantically and then lifted the bed curtains, wanting to relieve the dazed Fanny from their embrace. She suddenly saw Han Shua's burning hot gaze and a startled shriek emitted from Camilla's mouth. This scream startled the dazed Fanny awake. She recollected her senses and hastily stood up, not paying any attention to Han Shua. She frantically explained in a panic, Master Camilla, he's my student and has come to ask me some questions. I was afraid you'd misunderstand. That's why I told him to hide. Master Fanny, you don't have to explain. This is your private matter. Heh, no wonder you've rejected the advanced of many young men and ignored even Jean. So this is why. Your relationship is to the stage of sleeping together, this is truly surprising. Master Fanny, I apologize, I've disturbed you. I'll leave now. Camilla exclaimed in shock and apologized in a bizarre voice, walking directly outside. Fanny was in an extreme state of panic and disarray, seeking to hold Camilla back and wanting to explain. But no matter how she explained, Camilla continued to retain an ambiguous expression and display an "I understand" expression. She chuckled merrily as she walked out of Fanny's room. When Camilla had left Fanny's room, Fanny, standing in front of the door, circled the table in her panic and then seemed to remember something. She made threatening gestures at the Han Shoa still lying in bed, crying out, "Damned Brian, I'm absolutely not letting you off the hook today." Fanny had already jumped onto the bed when she finished speaking and commenced a punishment of fists and feet with a face full of wrathful anger, her little fists landing on Han Shoa's chest like rain. As a mage, Fanny had no way to use her fists and feet to attack and cause any damage to Han Shoa, but Han Shoa was utterly mesmerized as he watched the highly aggravated Fanny wave her little fists around, tottering and faltering from her movements and even revealing a portion of her snow-white, slender thigh because her skirt had become hiked up. First reaching out a hand to pretend to stop her, Han Shoa was hard-pressed to bear up beneath the agitation of his heart. In his feverish mind, he pushed Fanny down onto the bed and used his strong body to completely press down on Fanny's well-endowed, perfect body. He kept saying, "Master Fanny, calm down, calm down." Han Shoa paid lip service to asking Fanny to calm down while covering her with his body. Feeling the firm, pert tips of Fanny's breasts on his chest tightly adhered to Fanny's. The friction between the two bodies under Fanny's struggles caused Han Shoa to slowly lose himself. Fanny was breathless with anger. He was the one more impulsive than any other and yet he dared tell her to calm down. The pain in her hands becoming more and more pronounced, she couldn't move no matter how she struggled. As she watched Han Shoa come closer and closer, her heart was extremely agitated as she said continuously, "Damn it, stop already or I won't go easy on you." Chapter 82. The Eye of Darkness. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. A howl of agony rang out as Han Shoa clutched his lower body, moving off of Fanny. He curled up in pain as his mental state returned completely to normal. Fanny sat up, dusted herself off and got off the bed as if nothing had happened. She flicked a proud glance at Han Shoa and snorted lightly, "Well, do you recognize my strength now?" "Master Fanny, there was no need to be so vicious, was there?" Han Shoa grimaced as he clutched at his abdomen in pain. "Damn it, how dare you say anything? I've let the matter at the pool go, but you've violated me again. I've already gone easy on you by not killing you." Fanny was filled with rage at the thought of what had just happened as she glared at Han Shoa irately. Han Shoa scrambled down adroitly from the bed and sat down next to Fanny, his face full of seriousness. He said calmly, "Let bygones be bygones. I'm going to recite a magical incantation for you." Fanny saw that Han Shoa was all business and knew that he was purposefully shifting topics from what had just happened. A surge of rage grew in her heart and she was about to open her mouth and furiously berate Han Shoa when she suddenly heard Han Shoa's incantation. Fanny paid it no heed at first, but was then astounded when Han Shoa came to the end. A bafflingly excited light shone in her clear eyes as they focused on Han Shoa. She asked with a trembling voice, "This is necromancy magic. I can feel it, but how come I've never heard this incantation before?" "This is an incantation for an advanced magic, Canopy of Necromancy. It's necromancy magic that has been lost for many years. I also gained it unwittingly." Han Shoa explained slowly upon seeing Fanny's overjoyed expression. "Just what is going on, explain it to me clearly. And are there any other lost necromancy magics? Hurry up and tell me." Fanny had always been embroiled in the study of necromancy magic and had long since forgotten her earlier rage upon hearing the ancient incantation, that had been lost for ages, come out from Han Shoa's mouth. Rather, she asked him frantically instead. Internally heaving a sigh of relief, Han Shoa first gathered his thoughts calmly and then nodded, saying, "There's also an evil, corpse reanimation magic. I found it unwittingly. Master Fanny, you should know that these are all lost magics of our necromancy major, so I need you to temporarily keep this a secret." Master Fanny wasn't dumb, she immediately understood what Han Shoa intended and nodded her head like a chick pecking at rice, urging him on with her eyes. Han Shoa then went over the magical incantation and hand gestures for corpse reanimation and canopy of necromancy in detail for Fanny. He then brought out some knowledge that he had yet to fully grasp and inquired Fanny with them one by one. Fanny was delighted without comparison and had long since forgotten Han Shua's discourteous actions towards her earlier. She patiently explained and detailed the incomprehension that Han Shua had run into. Han Shua understood that he would be casting these spells sooner or later, but he didn't intend to let others know that he knew these secrets before his strength was enough. As an adept mage of the necromancy major and someone Han Shua admired, Han Shua hadn't planned on continuously hiding the truth from Fanny. Particularly when she was someone whose bark was worse than her bite, and was actually very caring towards him. After all, there was still some knowledge that he'd have to ask Fanny about in order to gain full understanding. Han Shua stayed in Fanny's room and talked until the middle of the night unbeknownst to both of them. The previously excited Fanny started yawning successively, then discovered that it was late. Fanny covered her mouth as she yawned and said lazily to Han Shua, "It's late, I'm going to rest. I've explained these questions to you, so you should return to the dorms and rest too." "Oh right, you haven't ever stayed in the dorms I've arranged for you, right?" Nodding, Han Shua got up and walked to the door. Just as Han Shua was about to push the door open and leave, Fanny suddenly said, "Brian, don't think I've forgotten what you've done to me. However, if you can apply yourself to your studies and graduate early from the necromancy major, perhaps I will forgive you." Han Shua started, halting in front of the room door and turned his head to see Fanny looking at him with expectation. Her expression was grave as she said seriously, "Brian, with your talent this shouldn't be difficult. As long as you're willing to work hard, you're sure to become a very strong necromancer, and then you'll be able to get everything you want." "Does that include you, Master Fanny?" Han Shua asked subconsciously. Fanny's heart trembled as she looked at Han Shua leering at her. Her cheeks suddenly reddened and she became irate, admonishing, "Get out. Scram, you sex-crazed bad boy." His heart full of joy, Han Shua felt that Fanny seemed to be a bit interested in him. From their recent conversations, he could tell that Fanny had certain expectations for him. He thought carefully and suddenly understood. He realized that if he wished to gain Fanny's heart, his current strength and status were truly a bit unrealistic. "Don't worry, I'll work hard. You'll see soon." Han Shua whispered as he paused in front of the door, then quickly left in the darkness. After he departed from Fanny's room, Han Shua didn't return to the dorm room that Fanny had arranged for him. There were people guarding the doors and some of the rooms were connected to each other. Han Shua didn't wish for others to discover his tracks, in case he raised the suspicions of Shadow Ghost and Grover. Particularly as he'd just heard Fanny say that she'd felt someone had been following her recently. This made Han Shua become even warier, afraid to exposing himself in front of others. Turning over these thoughts in his head, he felt that perhaps he should buy a house outside of the school grounds, otherwise he wouldn't even have a place to stay in the future when he returned to the Empire. If he had his own personal place, he wouldn't need to travel to the cemetery at the back of the academy every time he wanted to activate the transportation matrix. Just as Han Shua was quietly weighing this matter in his heart and walking to the side of the dark major library, he suddenly heard the sound of pages being turned. This caused his heart to suddenly contract in surprise as he immediately concealed himself noiselessly in the shadows of a corner around the library. Moving his neck slightly, 3 original demons flew out soundlessly, sneaking into the library under the cover of deep night. 2 figures held faint light in their hands, and Han Shua saw 2 familiar faces with the help of the feeble light source, the old mage Duke and the senior knight Eric. Han Shua had originally received the round, green ball, that opened the cemetery of death, from these people in the cemetery in the mountains behind the academy. The confident Eric had thought that Han Shua would be dead without a doubt after his fighting aura imbued slash. Thus, he hadn't checked Han Shua's body. After a few months, Han Shua hadn't thought that he'd see these 2 again in the dark major library. Be careful. Strong people are abound in this Babylon Academy of Magic and Force. Don't alert others, or we'll be in big trouble. Duke immediately admonished lightly upon seeing Eric flipping through pages with large motions. We still haven't discovered it, the books of the Necromancy Major have no record of anything to do with the Eye of Darkness. Eric flipped pages with a softer hand as he complained in a low voice. Ha! The Eye of Darkness is the key to opening the Cemetery of Death. We finally obtained it after a great deal of effort, to think that it would suddenly disappear. When Dylan died last time, the item was no longer on him. We went back to his place and searched all of it, but still found nothing. Why would that item suddenly disappear? This is strange indeed. The Babylon Academy of Magic and Force has many books regarding necromancy. Perhaps we can find some clues. Otherwise we can't afford to be targets when the higher ranks throw the blame around. Duke glared at Eric and said lowly. On the outside, thanks to the original demons eavesdropping, Han Shuo could thoroughly eavesdrop on their conversation and expressions. He finally understood that the round ball he held was the Eye of Darkness. It looked like the two were making a visit to the Dark Major Library late at night because they, too, had the same mindset as him, wanting to research the secrets of the Eye of Darkness in the library. After a short while, the two had gained nothing and left the library dejectedly. They left swiftly using a small road leading to the back of the academy. From their conversation, Han Shuo could conclude that the two seemed to be a part of some sort of organization. He had now obtained the Eye of Darkness and wanted to know more of their secrets and see if they would be a threat to him. He made use of the three original demons to trail them from a distance, slowly moving to the mountains in the back along with them. The two didn't pass through the cemetery in the mountains, only changing their direction after they'd left the academy grounds. They left quickly, using the streets of the northern district, finally walking into an isolated yard in the northern district. The three original demons had followed them here and were about to sneak into the yard for a good peek, according to Han Shuo's instructions, when he suddenly felt the original demons crash into something. Who? Immediately sounded out from the yard. Han Shuo was startled and immediately understood that some sort of boundary must have been set up around the yard. Otherwise the original demons, being without shape or form, would have never been discovered. The original demons seemed to sense danger as Han Shuo was recovering from his surprise. They retreated quickly, with Han Shuo hastily manipulating them with his mind, bidding them flee with all possible speed in three different directions leading to the northern street. After a while, the original demons returned to Han Shuo's body from three different directions, allowing him to heave a sigh of relief. He remembered the yard, knowing that there was a strong expert inside and temporarily gave up his continual observation. He discovered that these were the streets of the northern district just as he was about to leave. This yard was not too far away from Phoebe's residence. The sky was already growing slightly brighter at the moment. Han Shuo remembered the rations he had promised the dwarves and spent a silver coin for breakfast on the ride, then walked to Phoebe's residence. When Han Shuo arrived at Phoebe's residence, he immediately noticed that the presence of guards around her residence was much more numerous than before. Exceedingly soft sounds of breathing sounded from both sides of the door. It looked like experts were lying in wait inside. Apart from that, there was also a place within the building in which Han Shuo couldn't feel the flow of air. This let him know that a sort of field or barrier had been set up inside. Han Shuo knocked lightly when he arrived on Phoebe's doorstep. Someone swiftly arrived as soon as he'd knocked, but didn't directly open the door, asking softly behind the door instead, "Who is it?" "I'm called Brian, here to see Miss Phoebe." Han Shuo stood outside the door and said softly. "Please wait a moment." The person inside responded as another set of footsteps quickly faded away. After a while, two sets of footsteps could be heard from the other side of the door. "Is it Brian?" Fabian's voice rang out through the door. "It's me." Han Shuo responded. Sighing in relief, Fabian instructed, "Open the door, it is indeed Brian." The doors were opened to reveal Fabian, standing beside two swordsmen, who wore silver armor. Their faces were weathered and coarse, bearing the traces of many years of standing beneath the wind and sun. It looked like they were two experts. "Hurry and come on in. I haven't seen you for 10 days now. Phoebe often mentions you around me, saying that we'll forego a lot of hassle with you on our side and your extraordinary reflexes." Although a smile appeared on Fabian's face, he was obviously quite weary. "It looks like life hasn't been that easy for you. Last time I was here, security wasn't as tight as it is now." Han Shuo swept his gaze over Fabian as he teased him. Sighing lightly, Fabian said, "Don't mention it. Since the banquet, Miss Phoebe has been the victim of assassination attempts 3 times in the past 10 days. Each has been more vicious than the last. These people are from the Battlefire mercenary band. Miss Phoebe has spent a lot of money in order to hire them, but in the last couple of days, they've had 3 of theirs injured and 2 dead. It looks like Grover is starting to become anxious, but our circumstances have become more and more dangerous." They walked towards the main hall as they talked. Han Shuo could sense 2 more mages and 1 warrior in the corners of the surroundings. They seemed to be exceedingly strong. With so many experts protecting her and Phoebe's strength as a swordmaster, Grover and shadow ghosts, people must surely be extremely frightening with such a high number of casualties. 3 original demons once again flew out soundlessly from the back of Han Shuo's neck. They avoided the boundary that the Battlefire mercenary band had set and hid in 3 different parts of the room, silently observing everything around them. After a while, Phoebe walked in with a tall beauty with fiery red hair, pinned up in a ponytail. The girl's skin was copper-colored and her body was tall, athletic, and buff. Her breasts, butt, and body were large, and she wore a broadsword on her back. She too looked like a swordsman. "Brian, it's good to finally see you again. This is great," Phoebe said in surprise as she looked at Han Shuo. "Phoebe, this is the magical Brian that you've talked about." The athletic girl with the fiery red hair looked at Han Shuo skeptically as she spoke. "Yes, Candace. Let me see if he's as amazing as you say." Candace snorted lightly as she pulled out the broadsword behind her in one movement, suddenly slashing downwards at Han Shuo. When the broadsword was unsheathed, red flames immediately crept up onto the surface of the entire blade like a red dragon's breath. It looked like she was also a mage swordsman. Chapter 83. Existing and complementing each other. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Han Shuo never would have thought that this woman would make such a move out of the blue. She'd only said 1 sentence before turning to action. The broadsword made its way towards him, its fiery heat already causing some discomfort to his skin. Snorting coldly, the demon's lair edge suddenly appeared in Han Shuo's left hand. He infused it with magical yuan in the manner of the mystical glacial spell fire, making the dark red demon's lair edge suddenly emanate faint amounts of frigid, purple air. The temperature indoors suddenly changed. Candace's side was fiery hot, while Han Shuo's was glacially cold. Their 2 swords hadn't even met when the 2 hot and cold blasts met each other. Clouds of white smoke billowed out, but what surprised Phoebe was that Han Shuo's purple frosty air was different from any other ice magic she had seen before. It rather seemed like something living, and could even proceed in a twisted manner. When Han Shuo and Candace's swords connected, a violent force, interspersed with fighting aura, crashed into Han Shuo's demon's lair edge like an iron hammer. Han Shuo bedraggedly backed up a few steps, but the fighting aura found it difficult to proceed after surging into the demon's lair edge. It couldn't break through the demon's lair edge's resistance to hurt Han Shuo. It was rather Candace who suddenly cried out in shock. When the white fog dissipated and Han Shuo once more looked upon Candace, the broadsword in her hands already had a large chip in it. It looked like the demon's lair edge had harmed it. Candace looked like she possessed the strength of a senior swordsman, and her strength was even more unfathomable because she also possessed fire magic. The broadsword in her hand should have been a magical sword of exceedingly high quality, one that enhanced the power of the fire magics it was imbued with. Who would have thought that such a good quality sword would immediately be marked by Han Shua's? Just as Candace looked at the broadsword in her hand with a look of shock and anger, seemingly wanting to pursue a fight, Phoebe, standing off on the side, suddenly spoke up. "All right, Candace, Brian's forte isn't his brute strength. I've already said his amazingness comes from his extraordinary senses. He ruined my magical sword." Candace first glared at Han Shua and then complained to Phoebe. "Silly, you were asking for it. If you don't improve your brash temper, you'll suffer from a lot of disadvantages in the future." Phoebe flicked a resigned glance at Candace and tried to speak a few words out of goodwill. As her beautiful eyes looked over Han Shua, Phoebe displayed an exceedingly interested expression. She exclaimed in astoundment, "Is this the weapon you wanted to forge? Can I have a look at it? There's nothing to see, it's just a bit sharper than ordinary weapons." Han Shua put the demon's lair edge away without a change in expression, only smiling at Phoebe once he'd put it away. "Ha! Grinch!" Phoebe exclaimed softly and then pointed at Candace, introducing her to Han Shua. "This is the vice-captain of the Battlefire Mercenary Band, Candace. She's a friend that I've known for a while. Although her temper is a bit brash, she's a nice person. Don't mind her." Nodding, Han Shua flicked a glance at Candace, smiling, "I won't mind, but I hope she doesn't hold a grudge, heh. It's just a magical sword, and it's not completely broken. I'm not that miserly. Phoebe, you chat about your private matters, I'll go guard the door outside. I hope that damned Grover will come to his senses." Candace glared at Han Shua with disdain, and then walked outside with look of heartache on her face as she looked at the broadsword in her hand. As he watched Candace walk out of the room, Han Shua felt that although this girl was a bit hot-tempered, she wasn't the petty, grudge-holding sort. Otherwise she wouldn't have left so easily. "I've come to purchase some rations from you, and would like to ask you to find a secluded residence for me. It doesn't have to be big, as long as it's guaranteed that no one will find me easily." Han Shua didn't conceal anything as he looked at Phoebe, directly speaking frankly. "No problem, how much food do you need?" Phoebe was quite decisive and didn't hesitate at all. She agreed first, and then asked how much food was needed after. "Roughly enough for 100 people to weather the winter," Han Shua responded. Phoebe looked at Han Shua oddly as soon as he'd spoken. When he started to feel completely uneasy from her gaze, Phoebe asked, perplexed, "What are you going to do with enough winter rations for 100 people? Are you planning on leaving the Empire?" Shaking his head wryly, Han Shua knew that she would be suspicious. He said, "Don't think too much, I'm helping friends resolve a difficult matter. I won't leave the Empire in the short term without getting rid of Grover first. There's no problem regarding the food, but you'll have to give me a few days to prepare it. As for a secluded residence, I advise you to not live alone outside for the time being because Grover and the members of Shadow Ghost have continuously viewed you as a thorn in their side. If I look for a residence for you through my means, that may enable Grover to pick up a few clues. If you don't mind, you can stay here at my place for now. This way we can help each other as well. When the threat of Grover is neutralized, I can leave this house to you and will return to the guild again, what do you think?" Phoebe thought for a moment and looked directly at Han Shua. Han Shua thought carefully about Phoebe's suggestion and felt that what she said did make some sense. However, he was less enthused about accepting the house. After all, even if the threat of Grover was eradicated, there was still a threat if an enormous killer organization like Shadow Ghost knew of his hiding place. "I know what you're worried about, so don't worry. As long as Grover is eliminated, I have ways to ensure that Shadow Ghost will never make trouble for us again. I've formally taken control of the guild lately and am collecting evidence on Grover's crime. Grandpa Andrew is also fully supporting me. Grandpa Andrew has even found the tracks of Old Thing Grover's mistress. He's already sent men to take the items back. I think Grover is even more frightened than us right now." Phoebe spoke words of comfort upon seeing Han Shua's brow knit into a frown. Nodding, Han Shua said, "Then all right, I'll stay here for the time being. I'll leave after the threat of Grover has been removed." "That's great. With you here, those damned assassins won't be able to ambush us." Phoebe was overjoyed to see Han Shua agree. Phoebe then let Fabian arrange a room for Han Shua. Han Shua's room was also very spacious, with all of the daily amenities present. It was separated from Phoebe's room by only one wall. Han Shua sat cross-legged on the bed at night and started circulating his magical yuan, practicing magic as usual. Han Shua's magical realm had now reached the molded spirit level. This level was a process that unlocked the potential of the brain. As long as he made it past this level, Han Shua's memory, comprehension abilities, and observation skills would all increase enormously. His mind would be much smarter than an ordinary person's. Except, because this level was a type of awakening the mind's potential, it was particularly risky. One misstep could result in the mind sinking into a state of befuddlement, moving completely according to instinct. If it was serious, then the practitioner might lose their memories or have a split personality even after recovering from that state. Sitting on the edge of the bed, Han Shua's head was enveloped by a cloud of black light. It was like a cloud of black lightning had encircled Han Shua's head and was continuously releasing incredible amounts of lightning. This status was maintained for who knew how long. Han Shua breathed out lightly and stopped training with a sense of trepidation. After learning the horrors of the molded spirit realm, Han Shua himself proceeded with all due caution. He always chose the most quiet conditions to train, and didn't dare let any outside matters disturb him. After he stopped training, Han Shua saw that he was still in a good mental state and began to cautiously meditate again, wanting to increase his mental strength through meditation. Suddenly, his mind trembled with a crash and his mental strength started gathering at a speed many times faster than normal according to Han Shua's thoughts. Death energy was present everywhere beneath the heavens and earth. Han Shua could feel very clearly this time that through the use of mental strength, he could even slowly, bit by bit gather death energy. He could sense that the manner of gathering death energy was something that was completely unattainable in the normal course of casting magic. This time's meditation brought Han Shua into a marvelous world. Han Shua could clearly feel that his mental strength was increasing much faster than before. Although the benefits weren't as large compared to when he used the Eye of Darkness, the mental strength gained from this type of meditation was quite pure and clean and wasn't accompanied by pain. When Han Shua awoke from his meditations, he suddenly remembered that the first two levels of demonic magic emphasized training the meridians and bones of the body, but the level of molded spirit was completely made for training the potential of the mind. The meditation of mages were completely used to gather mental strength in the mind. They would never use it to train other parts of their body. Judging from this, if Han Shua's brain potential received a high degree of improvement, then the speed in which his mind gathered mental strength would naturally greatly increase. This would then lead to unquantifiable benefits for when Han Shua practiced his magic in the future. Indeed, it looks like the same evil methods of training from two different worlds can complement each other. It looks like even without the Eye of Darkness, the amount of mental strength I receive from meditating is much more than that of ordinary mages. Han Shua was gladdened and murmured to himself. "Phoebe, do you like this brat?" At this moment, light sounds of conversation floated in from next door. This house's soundproofing was good to begin with. If it were any other person, they absolutely would have been unable to clearly hear the conversations from the other rooms through the wall, but Han Shua wasn't an ordinary person. The perverseness of the sensitivity of his ears allowed him to clearly hear the murmured conversations of the two girls in the dead of the night. "Candace, what nonsense are you talking? Brian's helped me a few times, we're just friends who fight side by side." Phoebe had lowered her voice to the utmost and argued. "I don't think so. If it's just friends who fight side by side, then how come you keep defending him and give him such high praise? I just think you treat him a bit differently, that's all. Has something happened between you two?" From my high experienced instinct as a mercenary, you absolutely treat him differently from others. Candace's voice was suffused with thick mistrust and seemed to speak quite professionally. Really, there's nothing. We've been friends for so many years, would I lie to you? Oh, right, what do you think of Brian? What do you mean? One word, strange. No matter his skills, the weird sword in his hand, or his background, it's all very strange. I think this person must have a secret he's concealing, you better be careful. I'm not asking you that, I knew about that a long time ago. Why would I need you to remind me? I'm asking you, how is he as a person? Phoebe's tone was odd as she asked again. Huh? And you say you're ordinary friends? I don't see you caring this much about your other friends. His looks are okay, but he isn't handsome or charming either. I haven't come in contact with anything else, but according to your descriptions, he doesn't seem like much. Petty, profit-seeking, and sex-craved don't seem like pros. Han Shua heard everything they were discussing and was cursing Candace inwardly when the three original demons in a further location suddenly sensed the approach of assassins. There were 10 assassins this time. One of those in front was dressed in all black and his body was hovering in mid-air. It looked like he was at least of the Archmage level. Through the vision of the original demons, Han Shua could see that Grover had also appeared in the distance. His face was gravely cautious, and the experts by his side, such as Ellis and the others, were all part of this time's operation. It seemed that Grover was betting everything on a single cast of the dice. He was planning on making it difficult for Phoebe to escape this time. The three original demons slowly changed their directions according to Han Shua's instructions. They carefully avoided the area covered by the Archmage's mental strength, and carefully felt out the strength and numbers of those coming. It was the wee hours of the morning at this moment, and the guards were in the heavily fortified northern part of the city. This needed a few minutes and was when security was most lax in the entire northern part of the city. It seemed like these people had already carefully scouted out the conditions here. Han Shua measured the strength on his side and he felt that the odds were stacked against him. He could no longer pay attention to Phoebe and Candace's conversation. He rushed out of his room with the fastest possible speed, kicking the door to her room open with his foot and rushing inside with no reservations for anything whatsoever. Chapter 84. See who's a master of concealment. You are listening at novelfull.audio. What are you doing? Candace squealed in shock and suddenly stood up. Phoebe had been about to undress for bed when she saw Han Shua rush in. She, too, was startled and hastily pulled her clothes back on, looking at Han Shua with a face of panic. Grover and the people of Shadow Ghost are coming. Don't say useless things and think about what we need to do. Han Shua roared in a low tone at the two frantic women with a darkened face. Candace was still vaguely suspicious when he finished speaking and was about to express her opinions with a war face, whereas Phoebe had an extremely grave face and admonished, "Listen to him, Candace, Brian wouldn't be wrong." Candace didn't believe Han Shua, but she believed Phoebe. Upon hearing Phoebe's words, she immediately pulled out the broadsword from her back and nodded to Phoebe, dashing out suddenly like a ball of fiery shadows. Low sounds of warning immediately came from Candace. Phoebe didn't waste any time and grabbed a robe from the edge of the bed, flinging it onto herself. Her space ring suddenly brightened and a long sword sparkling with cold light materialized in her hand. Nodding to Phoebe, Han Shua quickly dashed outside of the house and saw that Candace was standing outside, giving orders in a low voice. Using the vision from the original demons, Han Shua closed his eyes and said, "3 people are approaching from the left, 130 meters away. 2 warriors and 1 mage. The mage is the wind adept Mage Ellis. An archmage along with 4 warriors and an archer is approaching from the front, roughly 130 meters away. There are most likely people from Shadow Ghost on the roof. Several people are lying in wait in an alleyway 50 meters to the right, and they seem to be laying down some sort of trap. As if he was watching the action from above, Han Shuo continuously and swiftly detailed the particulars of the people approaching swiftly. Candace hadn't believed it at first, and would have never believed that he could clearly detect the oncomers' movements from so far away, but Phoebe had immediately asked Candace to arrange people according to Han Shuo's descriptions as soon as she walked out of the room. "Miss Phoebe, I hope you make the preparations to retreat this time. According to my estimations, I think even with you as a swordmaster, we are still possibly not their match. If the situation goes south, I hope you don't linger here, but no matter how dangerous it is, don't retreat to the right. It's a dead end there." Han Shuo suddenly opened his eyes and stared at Phoebe as he said gravely. "Thank you, Brian, I know what to do. You be careful as well." Phoebe trusted Han Shuo a great deal, and when she saw him warn her with such a serious face, she immediately understood that it would be a dangerous battle this time. She immediately nodded gravely at Han Shuo, indicating her understanding. Breathing in deeply, Han Shuo willed the demon's lair edge out of the heart of his palm and checked the dagger concealed on his body, and the steel needles strapped to his legs. He then wielded a crossbow in his left hand and bounded up a nearby tree. The shadows of the house happened to completely conceal his body. Han Shuo stared calmly towards the left, not moving an inch. "And so they've come, everyone be careful and spread out." As a swordmaster, Phoebe finally heard the footsteps and inwardly rejoiced for trusting Han Shuo. She cast a gaze at Candace on her side. It was only now that Candace looked in shock at the Han Shuo, who was concealed in the shadows. She had never thought that Han Shuo would truly be this amazing. Not only could he detect movement from a distance of 100 meters, but it was as if he had a pair of eyes in the sky, thoroughly deducing all of the enemy's movements. Candace was a mercenary who had experienced hundreds of battles after all. After a short duration of shock, she looked at Phoebe and the two of them leapt up together. The two of them concealed themselves on either side of Han Shuo and also hid in the shadows. "Br. Brian, can you tell me slowly the movements of the enemy, so I can inform the people below?" Candace was about a meter away from Han Shuo when spoke in a soft voice. Maintaining his position without even a flicker of change in his expression, Han Shuo's voice was low as he faintly summarized the details of the enemy's movement. Candace held a magical item in her hand, utilizing it to give her commands to the mercenaries hidden amongst the yard. The three people from Grover's side, with Ellis in the lead, were the first batch to arrive. They paused on a nearby roof. Han Shuo and the others didn't move until the floating archmage appeared at the front door with the other experts from Shadow Ghost. It was only then that they held their breaths, focused their concentration, and prepared to make a move. No one saw how the archmage moved, only that his body was completely enveloped in a black robe. He muttered a few lines of incantations in an almost inaudible voice, and fierce magical pulses suddenly emanated towards Phoebe's residence. The rooms all began shaking violently as if a large earthquake was taking place. At the same time, the four warriors behind him swiftly spread out. One archer shifted to a roof on the side, observing the surroundings from a high vantage point. Ellis nodded to the two warriors after seeing the ground tremble and shake like a great beast awakening. The two of them leapt off and descended towards the yard. Whoosh 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 whoosh. 5 arrows suddenly appeared in the darkness, like 5 violent vipers submerged in deep waters. They sped swiftly to bite the two descending warriors. The two had concealed their movements and had never expected that they would face such a fierce attacks as soon as they'd leapt off. They were quite shocked and frantically waved their swords to block the arrows. 3 of the arrows were smashed to pieces, one of them was evaded by both of them, with only the one that Phoebe had shot out nailing directly into one of the warriors' calves. When the two landed, they triggered the field that had been laid out there and 3 bolts of lightning suddenly appeared in the air. Under the illumination of the lightning, Han Shuo could clearly see multiple strands of metal wire as thin as hair tangled together. When the two landed, their ankles were caught in the metal wires. The lightning crept amongst the metal wires, turning the area into a brilliant silver net with strong electricity flowing through it. The two people's bodies spasmed as they emitted ghastly howls. The one who wasn't injured quickly reacted after being electrocuted and thrust his sword out to cut through the metal wires and escape. The other one, with an arrow in his calf, foamed at the mouth and his hair was a burned mess as he slowly fell down into the metal net. This is bad, an ambush. Ellis had been about to descend like the others, but suddenly cried out upon seeing the two warriors had been hit, raising a hue and cry to warn the shadow ghost killers who were attacking from the front. The door cracked into 4 or 5 pieces with 2 loud cracks, and 4 warriors dressed in black came rushing in. They started searching the 2 sides of the yard. The Archmage floated into the yard, the magic staff in his left hand was wrapped in his long black sleeves. The rooms on the side started collapsing from the severe earthquake in accordance with his motions. Out of those of the Battlefire mercenary band lying in wait in the neighboring rooms, 2 directly died from the impact of the collapsing house. There were also 3 who had no choice but to rush out as well. They all held their weapons and stood in the yard. Han Shoa took a quick look and noticed that there was only a senior swordsman, a thunder journeyman mage, and an archer left. Hello reader, if you're not reading this on http://valorytranslations.com, then please be advised that this work has been stolen from the original translator. The Archmage waved the staff in his hand and a large surge of magic once again ripped outwards. 3 earth dragons suddenly erupted out of the earth, like pistons of ice, slashing towards the 3 Battlefire members, who had appeared. The senior swordsman and journeyman mage evaded in time, adroitly dodging to the side before disaster struck. The other archer raised his bow, gathered his concentration, and aimed at the Archmage, but he didn't have the chance to release the arrow before the earth dragon, rising beneath his feet, crushed his chest. The strong force of impact immediately caused him to lose his life. Calmly controlling his breathing, Han Shoa could clearly sense that Phoebe and Candace on either side of him suddenly started breathing more heavily. It looked like that with the death of this person, the calm stance that the 2 had always kept vanished completely. Afterwards, Phoebe and Candace both shot out crossbow bolts at the same time and sent them flying towards the Earth Archmage who released the Earth Dragons. The crossbow bolts had fierce momentum, but it was a pity that a wall of earth suddenly rose from the ground with a wave of his left hand. Their crossbow bolts collided with the wall and didn't cause any damage to the killer. In the shadows of the big tree. Ellis didn't disguise his voice this time and suddenly spoke with his original voice. The whooshing sound of a wind blade attack accompanied his voice. When Phoebe and Candace heard the sounds of an imminent wind blade attack, they immediately jumped out from Han Shoa's side. Phoebe held a longsword that dazzled with eye-catching light and dashed at the Archmage with the fastest speed possible. Candace's broadsword flared with tongues of fire licking at the skies, turning her into a fiery elf in the darkness as she swiftly charged Ellis. Wielding a crossbow, Han Shoa didn't move as he lay covertly in the shadows of the big tree. He didn't even raise a hand to fend off the incoming wind blades. Several wind blades ripped through the tree branches, and another 2 connected with Han Shoa's waist. However, he grit his teeth and bore it all, staying there unmoving, maintaining even his breathing and heartbeat at a very stunningly steady rate. Phoebe and Candace flew out from the tree, their flames of battle thoroughly stoked. Because the Earth Archmage had toppled all the houses with a huge earthquake as soon as he'd arrived, this caused many of the traps that the Battlefire mercenary band had set up to become ineffective. Phoebe was well aware of the horrors that an Archmage was capable of and thus had her sights set on him, immediately rushing forward, bringing all her strength to bear. When Phoebe made her move, the 2 senior swordsmen from Shadow Ghost immediately converged on the Archmage's location, presenting a combination of 2 melee and 1 mage to Phoebe. Off in the distance, the Shadow Ghost archer also coordinated with the other 2 swordsmen along with Ellis, starting their attacks on those of the Battlefire mercenary band. Wielding her broadsword, Candace sent a tongue of fire licking out with every swing of her weapon. The broadsword sent out dazzling light in the night sky, forcing the wind mage Ellis to continuously back up. Ellis' actions were extremely agile as he leveraged the power of the wind. As he quickly backed up, several columns of windblade tornadoes rushed towards Candace. When one of the journeyman swordsmen rushed to Ellis' side and combined their efforts in battling Candace, even the imposing Candace suddenly seemed to be under a lot of pressure. At this moment, whether it was Phoebe's side or Ellis and those of Shadow Ghost, everyone had fully revealed themselves in the broken and battered yard. Only Han Shoa still remained hidden within the darkness, still holding on after taking 2 direct hits from the wind blades. He was waiting for the best moment to attack. Phoebe and Candace were both in disadvantageous spots, but a few traces of expectation arose in their dejected hearts upon seeing Han Shoa continuously fail to materialize. The 2 girls were both smart ladies, and had already guessed that Han Shoa must be planning something despite his injuries. They all moved in unspoken accordance and slowly brought their opponents towards the big tree. After a short while, the struggling Phoebe and Candace had both gathered beneath the tree where Han Shoa was concealed, their movement cut off by the archmage, Ellis, and the other assassins. "Beautiful Miss Phoebe, after a few battles, I greatly admire your strength. However, you'll have no more chances this time. My deepest apologies." Ellis laughed gently as the sky in front of him howled and roared after his words, forming a violent tornado. The broken tree branches and rocks around them were all swept into the sky by this tornado as it moved towards Phoebe and Candace. The archmage said nothing as he extended his left hand, for high walls of earth rising from the ground, thoroughly enclosing Phoebe and Candace in a cage. The long sword in Phoebe's hand rippled with a blinding milky white aura, the light forming into the shape of a cross. It blasted through one wall of earth as she hopped out with Candace. The swordsman waiting on the side immediately started attacking Phoebe and Candace. Ellis had a sinister smile on his face as he focused his concentration and slowly manipulated the tornado to churn up the 2. Just at this moment, a crossbow bolt suddenly pierced through the air and shot towards the earth archmage wrapped in black robes. The archmage leaned to the side and a swordsman next to him waved his hand to ward off the crossbow bolt. A bone spear then materialized out of thin air, also shooting towards the archmage with a sharp whistling sound. The archmage seemed to feel a bit irritated as he slightly flexed his left hand. Earth magic once again gathered and a stone slab on the ground suddenly flew out, smashing the bone spear flying towards him into 2 halves. The archmage had just breathed a sigh of relief and was about to search for the enemy hidden in the shadows when a ghastly wail suddenly sounded. Ellis, not too far away, clutched his chest and raised a face full of fear to look at the top of the big tree. A sharp weapon burrowed out like a poisonous dragon, leaving his chest with a whistling sound. Pfft! An arrow of blood sprayed uncontrollably from Ellis' chest and Ellis raised his head to the sky. His knees suddenly gave way and he sank listlessly to the floor, pausing, and then fell stiffly backwards. Chapter 85. Earning a profit without working for it. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Ellis' sudden death also completely revealed Han Shoa's existence. As the weapon returned to his hand, Han Shoa also jumped down from the tree as well. At this moment, there was also an arrow sticking out of the side of the Thunder journeyman mage of the Battlefire mercenary band. It looked like he'd been hit by the archer from Shadow Ghost on the far roof at some point. The other senior swordsman was also spitting out blood. His body seemed to have been injured by the wind blades as fresh blood dripped out of his wounds onto the floor. "Leave this place." Han Shoa jumped down adroitly, took in the situation, and understood that even with Ellis dying in the ambush, they were still at a disadvantage. He immediately made the decision to retreat. Only a few moments had actually elapsed since the arrival of these killers until those several rounds of attacks just now. Before the change of the city guard had completed, the killers from Shadow Ghost would have more than enough time to slowly kill his companions, particularly when the original demons that Han Shoa had set up further away sensed that the others, who had been setting up traps, were also rushing this way. He naturally understood that their arrival would mean their chances of living had further decreased. Phoebe and Candace's beautiful eyes were already sparkling when Han Shua's command to retreat sounded out, seemingly already considering how to retreat. Before the two had decided, a thought struck Han Shua as he suddenly remembered a place and a crafty smile spread across his face. He suddenly said, "Follow me." Han Shua's body suddenly dashed towards one of the fallen walls of the house, the demon's lair edge flying out of his palm like a poisonous dragon. A large hole suddenly opened, accompanied by violent explosions. Han Shua caught the demon's lair edge as he arrived, charging out from the hole. Phoebe and Candace were close already to Han Shua and were also the closest to the opened hole. When Han Shua's body moved, the two beauties didn't hesitate and also flew over, escaping through the hole in the blink of an eye. The remaining two Battle Fire mercenaries looked at each other after seeing Candace and Phoebe leave, and also started escaping in two different directions. "Don't chase after them. After the two girls." The black-robed archmage suddenly opened his mouth at this moment. His voice was exceedingly sharp and unpleasant to the ears. Thus, all the killers gave up on the remaining two Battle Fire members and quickly squirmed through the hole, under the Archmage's instructions, and started chasing Han Shua and the others. Having trained in magic, Han Shua was extremely speedy as he furiously dashed. As warriors, the two beauties Phoebe and Candace didn't lag behind either. The two of them paid attention to nothing else, setting their sights on Han Shua, and chased after him. One of the original demons was one step ahead and had concealed itself in Han Shua's path. With an additional set of eyes up ahead, Han Shua would especially pick isolated areas to flee to as he threaded through various yards and alleyways. With the existence of the original demons, Han Shua could map everything into his heart and wouldn't take a single wrong path. Gradually, Han Shua's band of three slowly widened the gap between them and their pursuers by leveraging the terrain. A fork in the road suddenly appeared, one led in one direction in a more twisting and turning fashion, whereas the other was wider and didn't offer that many areas of concealment in the middle of the road. Following behind Han Shua, Phoebe and Candace were incredibly astounded by Han Shua's familiarity with this region. They watched as Han Shua used his knowledge of the land to leave their pursuers far behind them. When the fork in the road appeared, the two of them naturally thought that Han Shua would dash into the more twisty and turning road and use that opportunity to completely shake off their pursuers. They hadn't thought that Han Shua would suddenly stop and take out a black mask and cover his face, throwing another two at Phoebe and Candace, hurriedly urging them, "Wear it." While Candace was still hesitating, Phoebe had already pulled the mask on without another word, covering her beautiful face entirely. Seeing that the pursuers had already appeared in the corner of the street, Phoebe rushed Candace, "Hurry." Candace no longer hesitated after Phoebe spoke up. She frantically put on the mask and then took out another set of black Nightwalker clothes from her space ring, seemingly planning on wearing them as well. "Don't put on the black clothes. Let's move," Han Shua suddenly said as he looked at their pursuers behind them. Having paused briefly for a few seconds, his body moved again, running past the quiet, windy path and making for the other broad street without any concealment. Even Phoebe was startled as she didn't understand why Han Shua did so, but this wasn't the time to ask extraneous questions. Based on her trust in Han Shua, Phoebe lightly tugged Candace and ran after Han Shua decisively. "Don't run full out, make sure that those who are following us can follow our tracks." Han Shua briefly dropped his speed and pulled up side by side with Candace, whispering to the two girls. "What the heck are you doing? If we didn't slow down and went on the other path, I think we would have escaped by now. Why are we going to such lengths, like using masks to cover our faces? They know what we're wearing, there's no point in doing so and rather makes us appear like idiots." Candace complained. "Heh, I'm using a mask to cover my face, not to deceive them, but in order not to reveal our faces to another group of people. When I came through here yesterday, I discovered a set of shady, surreptitious people in the house ahead. These people are also very strong and must not be up to anyone good. If the people of Shadow Ghost met with them, I think some trouble can be caused. Perhaps we can use this to resolve our shadow ghost troubles in one go. Han Shuo explained simply with a sinister tone. You're so depraved. Candace blurted after a moment of stunned silence. Brian, we can't bring danger to innocent people. Are you sure they're not good people? Phoebe started and asked Han Shuo. Don't worry, I'm sure they're not good people. I even saw them creeping around the academy grounds yesterday to steal things. How could they possibly be good people when committing such crimes? Han Shuo promised to Phoebe and then suddenly said lowly, be careful, it's that yard up ahead. I'll attack from the distance in a moment and then we'll immediately flash behind that yard. Be careful not to reveal yourself at all costs. His speed suddenly picking up, Han Shuo, Phoebe, and Candace rushed towards the yard that lay before them. Han Shuo suddenly took out a crossbow when he arrived at the front of the door and fired off a crossbow bolt without aiming. He then took out a metal needle and randomly flung it into the yard as well. After doing all this, Han Shuo grabbed Phoebe and Candace once again and found a hiding place that an original demon had already scouted out, a square, stone box that was a trash dump behind the house that didn't have a lid. It stinks. Candace immediately covered her nose and cried out lowly. Phoebe also covered her nose, a morass of disdain and discomfort surfacing in her eyes. This place was very narrow and there were also a few trash bags present. Han Shuo crouched down in the middle, with Phoebe and Candace crouching down on either side of him. The three of their bodies all pressed tightly together. Han Shuo naturally couldn't avoid the stink that Candace and Phoebe were smelling, and could only use the mask on his face to cover his nose. Han Shuo didn't say anything and used his hand to make a shushing noise, indicating for the two to talk less and closely observe their surroundings. Enemies. A low call came from inside the yard and slight footsteps sounded from inside, seeming to search for traces of the invaders. At this moment, the crouching Han Shuo, Phoebe, and Candace saw that the Archmage, that had been floating in midair, had caught up with a few killers from Shadow Ghost. They went inside this yard. A swordsman immediately reported to the Archmage when they arrived. The Archmage nodded and waved the magic staff covered by his long sleeve. A strong magic pulse once again appeared suddenly, and the earthquake spell that had been used on Phoebe's house once again showed itself in this yard. All the structures and buildings collapsed one by one as the Archmage cast his earthquake spell. A noisy din of curses and yells suddenly sounded out from inside. Duke and Eric, as well as some of the other people in the yard, flared out their fighting aura and magic without a second warning, attacking the black-robed Archmage. Duke also floated in mid-air, he was an Archmage as well. An ornate magic staff accompanied the conclusion of his wind magic incantation as hundreds of wind blades formed a tornado, churning towards the black-robed Archmage and the other. The tornado, made of wind blades, possessed a frightening force. The sand, little rocks, and small trees in its path were swept up and crushed to dust. Damn it, why is there another Archmage present? Grover didn't tell us about this. A shrill exclamation came from the black-robed Archmage's mouth as he raised an earthen wall in front of him and hastily retreated. The swordsman from Grover's side and an archer from Shadow Ghost didn't react in time and were dragged in by the tornado. Endless rounds of ghastly screams rang out as the two were ripped apart in a mass of blood and flesh. They were transformed into a mist of blood and signs of life ceased to exist. After them. Duke snorted coldly and dashed out of the shambles of the yard with Eric and a few others, chased after the other members of Shadow Ghost, who had already started fleeing in the distance. Magics crashed against each other along the way as endless polypola sounds of explosion were emitted. Where are these people from? They're so strong. Candace murmured with a face of shock after they'd left. This yard is in ruins and there's no one inside. We don't have to stay here anymore. Phoebe hastily jumped out and stayed far away from the stone box that had been used to store trash. Candace and Han Shuo walked out from inside as Han Shuo laughed lightly, at this moment, the city guard should have finished changing shifts. I wonder if these two groups of people will alert the guard. You're sinister indeed. What should we do next? At this moment, Candace had started treating Han Shoa as the leader at some unknown time. Now that the danger had been resolved and he had brought Shadow Ghost and Grover's people a huge amount of trouble, she opened her mouth and asked Han Shoa. Miss Phoebe, I think I may know where Grover's mistress is. At this moment, Han Shoa suddenly opened his mouth. Her face showed an overjoyed expression. Phoebe looked at Han Shoa with a look of excitement and asked hurriedly, where is she? Follow me. It looks like we won't be resting much tonight. Han Shoa shrugged his shoulders with resignation, took his bearings and led them to traverse the wide road, walking towards a dark and narrow path. Grover had revealed himself at the very beginning. When Ellis and those of Shadow Ghost had rushed into Phoebe's house, Grover had stayed in a house a short distance away and awaited the news. One of the three original demons had stayed by Grover's side, monitoring him. Grover left alone only when Phoebe's house had collapsed. He didn't return to the guild, but boarded a carriage that had been prepared prior, saying to the groom, go to Kara's place, be careful. Han Shoa had heard from Phoebe last time that Grover's mistress was called Kara. This was why he'd notified Phoebe and Candace. The three original demons would become harder to control if they were too far from Han Shoa's side. When Grover had left, Duke and the members of Shadow Ghost on this side had just made contact. Han Shoa's control over the original demon became more and more difficult as Grover's carriage rushed away. When Phoebe and Candace agreed, they immediately traveled at full speed towards Grover's location. The sky was starting to grow hazily bright when Han Shoa appeared on the streets in the west of the city with Phoebe and Candace. Compared to the northern and southern sides of the city, it was dirty and messy here, with trash everywhere on the streets. A few beggars were wearing thin clothes in this frigid weather. They had curled themselves up and lay next to the piles of trash, seeming to want to obtain some warmth from the trash bags. To think that Grover, with his status, would come to the slums. He'd hidden his mistress away here, no wonder we couldn't find her. Grover is a difficult person to move against, all right. Phoebe frowned as she looked around and said lowly to Han Shoa. All right, this is the place. Follow me, I don't think Grover will be able to escape this time. Han Shoa had seen through the eyes of the original demon that Grover had entered a dirty and broken house. He immediately circled past the piles of trash in front after speaking to Phoebe, darting into an alleyway in which flies and bugs danced in flight. Although they were disgusted by this place, Phoebe and Candace still grit their teeth and darted in after Han Shoa. The two continuously flapped their hands, trying to shoo away the flies around them. Chapter 86. New Pursuits. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Han Shoa, Phoebe, and Candace walked into the dirty and run-down house. It was actually very clean and neat inside, with a few decorations that could even be called luxurious. To think that it was only dirty and broken down on the outside, but quite fancy on the inside. After entering the house, Candace abruptly closed the door tightly, emitting a thumping sound that she was unable to conceal. Her broadsword in her hand, she barred the way out. Candace, you don't need to be that careful. My dear uncle doesn't know any martial arts or magic, he won't be able to escape this time. Phoebe's mask had been taken off and she displayed her stunning features. She sat down leisurely at random, coldly looking at a room with its door open. Han Shoa inspected his surroundings and observed by using the original demons. When he ascertained that no suspicious characters were around, he then poured a cup of warm water and took 2 greedy sips. Grover walked out of the room, through the open door, with a face full of dejection. He released a ghastly laugh and looked at Phoebe. Good niece, dear niece. To think that you'd been hiding your strength all along. Was Kara already taken by you? Phoebe started and looked in surprise at Grover. She shook her head. No, I've only just discovered this place. Let Kara live, I'll give you everything you want, including my life. Grover knew it would be difficult for him to escape death with the way things were now, and had let everything go. I'm sorry, Kara isn't in my hands. If my guess is correct, Grandpa Andrew sent men here already and she's been taken by them. I don't have the authority to decide whether she lives or dies. Phoebe shook her head and stared at Grover with a cold look. She asked again, "Did you kill my father?" "Yes, I poisoned him. Since you already know everything, I have nothing further to hide. What else do you want to know?" Grover's face was wooden as he nodded stiffly. Inhaling deeply, Han Shoa could clearly feel the suppressed anger surging from Phoebe. Phoebe slowly stood up and looked at Han Shoa and Candace. "I want to speak privately with my good uncle. Brian, will you guys go outside and wait for me?" Nodding, Han Shoa put the teacup in his hand down and left with Candace, walking towards the alleyway entrance far away. "Hey, can I ask you something?" Candace kept sizing up Han Shoa when they had left the house and finally couldn't help but ask after a while. Han Shoa had been contemplating Duke's background with a lowered head when he heard Candace's question. He raised his head and looked at her in confusion. As a girl, Candace's height was a bit taller than ordinary girls. Her skin wasn't pale, but rather the copper tone of one having spent many years in the sun. Her body was quite fit and muscular, and her breasts looked like they would explode out of her top. Her thighs were supple and full of explosive power. She looked as difficult to handle as a feisty mare. "What would you like to know?" Han Shoa wasn't kindly disposed towards Candace, but he didn't hate her either. "How were you able to locate the assassin's movement so clearly, like you saw them all with your own eyes?" A heavy sense of curiosity permeated across her face as she looked at Han Shoa with every expression of interest. "There's a magic called Eye of the Sky, you must have heard of it. My method is similar to that one. Of course there are some differences, but I can't tell you the exact details." Han Shoa flicked a glance at her and said faintly. "Two archmages were unable to detect the disturbances from your method. It's wondrous indeed. Can you pass this method on to us? If our mercenary band knew of this method, it would greatly increase the success rate of our missions. We are willing to offer a hefty reward for this. I've heard that you're a merchant, you can name your price. We can negotiate no matter how high it is. Other forms of payment will work as well as long as our mercenary band can do it." Candace looked at Han Shoa with sparkling eyes and discussed very earnestly with him. Shaking his head firmly, Han Shoa rejected her resolutely. "My apologies, there are some things I won't sell." "My apologies, Miss Candace. Then will you join our Battlefire mercenary band? As the vice captain of the band, I can directly approve your application. With your strength, you will surely accomplish great deeds if you join us." Candace seemed to know that Han Shoa would reject her and wasn't discouraged at all. Rather, she invited him to join them and become a member. "I'm sorry, I don't plan to for the time being." Han Shoa rejected politely again. "Alright, when you plan to, please remember to come find us, the Battlefire mercenary band, when you want to. I will greatly welcome you with open arms." Candace promised solemnly. Phoebe walked out of the house with a cold and remote expression at this moment. Her face only softened when she saw Candace and Han Shoa. She asked, "What are you guys discussing?" "Nothing much." "Oh right, Phoebe, what about Grover?" Candace pouted a bit awkwardly as she asked Phoebe. "He killed himself just now. I've already gotten what I wanted from him, we can leave now." Phoebe's expression was strange as she looked at Candace. "Then there shouldn't be anything to do with me after this. May I leave now?" Han Shoa suddenly spoke up when he saw the two conversing. Phoebe once again focused her beautiful eyes on Han Shoa and looked dumbly at him, then said to Candace, "Candace, two of your people from the mercenary band made it out. Go contact them first and see if anyone else survived in the wrecked yard." Candace looked at Phoebe and Han Shoa with an ambiguous expression and displayed a smile of understanding. She nodded at Phoebe and walked off with large strides. Brian, will you take a walk with me? Phoebe blushed after seeing Candace's meaningful gaze and slowly returned to normal only after she'd left. She looked at Han Shoa with a face of expectation. Sure, where would you like to go? Han Shoa thought and he asked. Let's walk around the southern district. I think the Buzzed Merchant Guild no longer poses a threat to me anymore. Han Shoa didn't say much else as he accompanied the beautiful Phoebe on a slow walk down the dirty streets. There were people who had obviously fallen on hard times on the streets and they shot admiring glances at the richly dressed Han Shoa and Phoebe. In this world, our guild actually doesn't have much status. Although merchants earn some gold, our status is basically the same as ordinary citizens. Phoebe's voice was far away as she said introspectively to Han Shoa by her side. Miss Phoebe, you don't see the gazes of the other people on you. They're actually full of admiration and envy. To them, your current life is what they dream to have. What else are you unsatisfied with? Heh, we almost died yesterday. They can't even imagine a life filled with unknown dangers. Perhaps they worry over living out their daily lives, but we worry about our lives. I wonder who admires who. Phoebe sighed self-deprecatingly. She suddenly stopped walking and concentrated her gaze on Han Shoa. Brian, with your abilities, you are certain to climb quite high as long as you are willing to work hard. I had thought to ask you to manage the guild with me, but I've thought through this clearly. I think the small Buzzed Merchant Guild would be insufficient to hold you. You should have more expansive skies. Brian, have you thought about how you should live in the future? Han Shoa started as he remembered his status. Although he had left behind the label of errand slave, he was still a student of the academy. With his status, even if he swiftly graduated from the academy, there was still nothing to his name. Of course, this wasn't the life he wanted, but just that Han Shoa didn't have any other plans for the time being. Power and a lofty position is what you should be reaching for. As much money as a merchant has, he is still a small character at the mercy of others. Only those with an illustrious reputation and an extraordinary position have the right to control over and determine the lives of others. You should become one of those types of people. A mesmerizing light shone in Phoebe's beautiful eyes as she stared directly at Han Shoa, her voice full of persuasion. His mind had never been so agitated before. Han Shoa had thought of these things before, but never as clearly as in this moment. Since he had been lucky enough to be reborn, he should enjoy everything there was to life without reservations. Why didn't he use the strength that was available to him? Under Phoebe's persuasion, Han Shoa's mindset of not wanting to remain ordinary slowly started to catch on fire and he became full of resolution. After a while, Han Shoa took in a deep breath and nodded, saying lowly, I understand your meaning, but my opportunity hasn't seemed to arrive yet. A brilliant smile spreading over her face, Phoebe seemed to have been waiting for these words. When she heard Han Shoa's words, she immediately stared at Han Shoa and said, You're wrong, the chance has always been there. The fastest way to obtain power and status is to achieve meritorious acts in war. The Empire has never been at peace, and our battles with neighboring countries has never stopped. I think a large war will break out in the near future. I think you should get involved. As your good friend, I'm willing to help you and do all that I can to help you. I appreciate your good intentions, but I would like to obtain all that I deserve through my own hands. Han Shoa said resolutely to Phoebe, paused and then said again, Miss Phoebe, please prepare the rations I need. I'll come by the guild in a few days to pick them up. I think we'll have many opportunities to cooperate in the future. Then all right, I've said all that needs to be said and won't need you to accompany me further on this random stroll. I trust that with your abilities, you will soon rise to prominence within the kingdom. Don't forget that I'm your friend then. Phoebe winked at Han Shoa and said cutely. Heh, your words today have greatly inspired me, I will remember them. Farewell Miss Phoebe, don't forget my rations. Han Shoa smiled and suddenly changed direction, heading for the northern part of the city. Phoebe pouted angrily after quite a while had passed since Han Shoa had left. She said huffily in a voice that only she could hear. "Damn it, you only care about your rations." Chapter 87. Joining the Dark Mantle Organization. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. After parting ways with Phoebe, Han Shoa returned directly to the academy. However, he once again avoided entering through the front gate and decided to enter through a secluded corner from the mountain in the back. Han Shoa suddenly became wary in the woods that he had spent time with Phoebe last time, an unexplainable feeling of unease rising in his heart. This shock made Han Shoa immediately release his 3 original demons. They flew out from the back of his neck and patrolled the entire woods, but didn't find anything. The feeling of unease didn't vanish after the original demons failed to find anything. That exceedingly uncomfortable feeling grew stronger and stronger, making Han Shoa incredibly wary. The demon's layer edge appearing in his hand, Han Shoa took a deep breath and readjusted his facial expression to be at his best. He tried using his own senses to detect the abnormalities around him and called out, "Who is it? Come on out." Han Shoa had only randomly called with this line and hadn't actually thought that anything would happen, because if it was an enemy at this level definitely wouldn't appear just because Han Shoa had called out. But unexpectedly, a low, eerie laugh rang out from the thick woods as soon as he'd finished speaking. A human shape slowly took form in front of Han Shoa within the shadows of the large trees. "Kid, you have a good level of awareness. How did you discover my existence?" When the figure within the shadows of the tree had materialized, a ruthless-looking old man, who was exceedingly tall, skinny, and wearing gray clothing, walked out. The old man's beard was gray and his eyes were the color of ash. They looked completely lifeless. "Due to my instincts, who are you?" Han Shoa gripped the demon's layer edge firmly and watched the approaching old man with a hostile gaze, ready to make a move at any moment. "I can give you the opportunity of a lifetime. I'm acquaintances with Phoebe's master and mean you no harm, you don't need to be so nervous." Han Shoa could feel a strong sense of danger exuding from this person. This was probably the strongest person he'd met since coming to this world. Han Shoa even felt that if the old man were to make a move, he'd be hard-pressed to escape. "Phoebe. So Phoebe sent you, what do you mean by all this?" Han Shoa reined in his impulse to flee from this person and asked with a darkened face. The old man suddenly halted in his tracks and didn't continue forward. He just stood there, sizing up Han Shoa, like he was observing an item he expected to sell at a high price. He kept nodding his head and a smile blossomed on his face after a while, but when this smile floated out from his ruthless features, it only made one feel that his face became even more sinister. "Phoebe doesn't know of my existence, but I know everything about your recent actions. I heard the conversation between you and Phoebe just now and have an offer to make you, but if you choose this path, you can obtain all that you want, but you may also die very quickly." The old man said slowly as he looked at Han Shoa. "Who are you?" Han Shoa was a bit lost and had no idea what the old man wanted. He immediately asked again. "Brian. Parents died when he was young and was then sold off to the necromancy major of the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force by his uncle to become a slave. 6 years as an errand slave. Started displaying extraordinary abilities during an outing to the Dark Forest and seems to possess another wondrous way of training in addition to training necromancy magic." Han Shoa's heart sank slowly as the old man started listing details from his life. Apart from a few secrets having to do with the little skeleton and the cemetery of death, most of the doings that he'd experienced in this period of time were all ferreted out. This made Han Shoa feel that a pair of eyes had been fixed on him in the darkness, and a sense of fear rose in his heart. "Who are you?" This was the 3rd time that he asked about the old man's origins. "I'm called Candide and I belong to the Empire's Dark Mantle organization that directly answers to His Majesty." "Heh heh, there's a covert organization behind every nation. I think you understand the need for such an organization's existence. The people of Shadow Ghost have appeared in the Buzzed Merchant Guild several times now. You guys have caused such a great disturbance. Did you really think that we wouldn't know anything? Old man Candide looked at Han Shoa with a vague smirk as he said slowly. Han Shoa was greatly startled after he heard these words and heaved a silent sigh as he finally realized that he really was still too naive. He'd never heard of Dark Mantle, but immediately understood after Candide's explanation that this organization must be similar to the Western Depot and the Eastern Depot of the Ming Dynasty, government agencies that directly answered to His Majesty, the Emperor. All right, what do you want from me? I'd like to absorb you into our Dark Mantle. I've carefully investigated your birth and think there shouldn't be a problem. I've also kept my eye on you lately and feel that your working style and special abilities will enable you to handle the jobs of Dark Mantle with competence. If you join the Dark Mantle and achieve exemplary accomplishments for the Empire, you can obtain everything you want. Candide looked at Han Shoa and gave this invitation. Han Shoa's brows knit together and considered it carefully. Candide's invitation wasn't as simple as it appeared on the surface, but with Han Shoa's status and strength, if an enormous organization like Dark Mantle wanted to make a move against him, only death would be in his future. There was a path in front of him now, and although it was dangerous, the destination remote, and full of uncertain factors, it was indeed an opportunity. This presented quite a bit of strong temptation to the now hotly ambitious Han Shoa. After weighing his gains and losses, Han Shoa felt that he didn't seem to have much choice. Han Shoa nodded firmly after a while and said lowly, I accept. Wonderful. Although you might be placed in more dangerous situations in the future, as long as you can climb high enough, you'll have the chance to see beautiful sights that many will be unable to ever see in their lives. Candide laughed lightly and took out an iron badge, handing it to Han Shoa. This is the badge that symbolizes our status as members of the Dark Mantle. Put it away carefully, you're under my command from today onwards. Your first mission is to keep an eye out for Duke's movements. Oh, he's the Wind Archmage that came flying out of the house that you guys brought the members of Shadow Ghost to last night. There was a certain heft to the black iron badge, with the words Dark Mantle carved on the back. There was also an image of the crown carved in back. The crown was floating above a patch of black clouds and was also black-colored. Who is Duke, where is he now, and how should I keep an eye on his movements? Han Shoa was greatly startled and wondered how astonished Duke would be if he discovered that Han Shoa was keeping surveillance on him. He might even guess that the Eye of Darkness was with Han Shoa. If Han Shoa were to keep tabs on Duke, then he himself would also bear greater risk. Hesitating, Candide explained, Duke isn't a person from our Lancelot Empire. He's from the Kasi Empire and is here as a representative of the Maya School of Magic from the Kasi Empire. He's here to conduct an exchange of magical knowledge with your Babylon Academy of Magic and Force. Of course, these are all excuses that they've come up with. Their true goal must not be this, but they've hidden it well. We don't know what they're up to at the moment. That's why we need someone to keep an eye on them. Therefore, he'll visit your academy often during this time. As a student within, you're the most convenient person to keep a watch over him. Oh, right. Since you've joined Dark Mantle, no more killers from Shadow Ghost will bother you. I will tell them to behave themselves. Nodding, Han Shoa said, I see. All right then, I'll keep an eye on Duke's movements. How should I find you if I discover something abnormal? These are our 3 strongholds within the Empire. Destroy this after you look at it. This badge represents your identity and you can use it to exchange information with others in the strongholds. However, your level is too low thus far and you won't have the right to ask about many things. If you can advance to a higher status, you'll be able to use the resources of Dark Mantle and can even deploy the Empire's army. Heh, you must work hard. Candide said to Han Shoa. A thin piece of paper landed in Han Shoa's palm. He looked it over once and ripped it to pieces in front of Candide after he'd memorized the contents. He then said, "All right, my mind's a mess right now and I need some time to think. I'll report to you if Duke does anything out of the ordinary. I'm going to leave now as well. The members of Dark Mantle have a lot of freedom. We won't intervene in your private affairs, and will only come for you when there's a mission that needs to be conducted. We won't affect your life under normal circumstances." Candide was surrounded by a cloud of black mist and his figure became fainter and fainter. A thin pulse of magic traveled out of the mist, and he then vanished from Han Shua's sight as the breeze blew past, like he'd never appeared. Han Shua had clearly identified what he needed under Phoebe's persuasion not too long ago. Who would have thought that an olive branch would be extended as soon as he'd left Phoebe? He'd joined this Dark Mantle organization after a round of discussion with Candide. This made Han Shua subtly feel that something was wrong, and he started to suspect whether or not Phoebe knew of Candide's existence. This would simply be too much of a coincidence otherwise. However, even if Phoebe and Candide were acquainted with each other, then Grover wouldn't have been anything in the face of Candide's enormous power. Phoebe wouldn't have so many troubles either. This made Han Shua quite confused as well. Han Shua carefully sorted out his thoughts within the woods and went over everything that had happened recently in his mind. He then set off towards the academy grounds again with a look of resolution. Chapter 88. But I have a guilty conscience. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Han Shua had been worried that he would be found out by Duke, but had thoroughly dispelled these worries a few minutes after arriving at the Necromancy Major. The reason was because when Han Shua arrived, he naturally greeted Borg and Carrie when he saw them cleaning off the stone sculptures along the path. However, the two didn't recognize Han Shua and were at a loss of what to do with their profound respect and humility. When Han Shua identified himself and Borg and Carrie cautiously recognized him, they spoke to him with an even more fearful attitude. Han Shua was no longer an errand slave of the Necromancy Major now. He'd turned into a student and his status was naturally higher than these two errand boys. Add to that the fact that the Necromancy students had purposefully exaggerated Han Shua's aid when they returned from the Dark Forest. This made the two previous enemies, Carrie and Borg, even more afraid that Han Shua would come looking for them. However, Han Shua didn't pay attention to the two and rather took out a bronze mirror and admired himself in it, full of bliss. He'd suddenly discovered that his features had indeed gone through tumultuous changes compared to a few months ago. His originally frail and thin frame had become much stronger and taller. His weak facial features had become much more resolute after a series of life-threatening experiences. His features had become much more pronounced, and had changed from those of an old child half a year ago to that of a dashing and charming young man. If even Borg and Carrie, two errand boys, who were well acquainted with Han Shua, couldn't recognize him easily, then Han Shua wouldn't need to worry about Duke and Eric, particularly after Candide had promised to take care of the overhanging cloud known as Shadow Ghost. Han Shua suddenly felt completely relaxed and didn't continue to conceal his traces. He returned to the academy openly in public. It's Brian. You haven't come back to the academy in so long. I thought something happened to you. Amy, from the Necromancy Major, had been on her way to the classroom building when she suddenly exclaimed upon seeing Han Shua. Hello, Amy. Han Shua smiled as he greeted her and walked towards the Dark Major's classroom building with her. When Han Shua arrived at the Necromancy Major's classroom, he lost himself in thought for a little while. Just 2 short months ago, he could only hold his broom and make use of the time that he had while cleaning to stand outside and listen to Jean's lectures. Who would have thought that in just a short period of time, he'd turn into a Necromancy Major student and had the right to enter the classroom to sit down and listen to lessons with the other students. Don't just stand there, the second class is about to begin, come on in. Amy suddenly spoke up to rush him when she walked up to the door and saw that Han Shua was standing dumbly outside the window. Han Shua immediately came to his senses and smiled kindly at Amy, nodding as he walked into the classroom. As soon as Han Shuo walked in, the gazes of several students inside suddenly all focused on Han Shuo, particularly Lisa in the back row. She had been lazily shutting her eyes when her eyes suddenly gleamed as she stood up and waved at Han Shuo, "Here, over here." Bach and Bella's gazes upon Han Shuo, as well as those from some other majors, were exceedingly odd as they murmured something lowly. "Brian's back, heh heh. Amy, do you believe the rumors?" Athena suddenly asked Amy in a low voice after she greeted Amy. "I don't really believe it. It doesn't look like anything would ever happen between Master Fanny and Brian. Camilla, that old witch, loves to carry tall tales, you believe stuff that she says." Amy pouted and shook her head. It wasn't just Amy and Athena. When Han Shuo walked towards Lisa, he heard all the students talk about him and Fanny. They talked vividly about Camilla finding Han Shuo on Fanny's bed, as if they'd personally been there. In their mouths, he and Fanny became a couple caught in the act. Han Shuo felt quite speechless. He hadn't thought that Camilla would be such a busybody and make it so that all the necromancy students knew of this matter. This probably meant the other teachers, including Fanny herself, had gotten the news even earlier. Lisa's originally excited expression turned into one of interrogation after Han Shuo sat down with a wry smile. Her gaze first made a surprised circuit over Han Shuo, as if marveling over his changes. She then said coldly, the things they're talking about, are they true or not? Is there really something between you and Master Fanny? Lisa, how could even you not believe me when they don't believe me? If I were someone like that, Master Fanny would never be someone like that. I can't believe someone would actually believe such ridiculous things. This is too outrageous. Han Shuo explained softly to Lisa with a wry expression. Lisa breathed a small sigh of relief after Han Shuo's words, and her expression also eased off, but she still asked suspiciously, "Rumors don't come from nothing. It should be true that you went to Master Fanny's room in the middle of the night, right? Although that old witch Camilla has a fat mouth, she wouldn't implicate you with no evidence at all." Shrugging, Han Shuo said, "I only went over to ask Master Fanny a few questions. The old witch made a mountain out of a molehill and I can't stop her from speaking. She can say whatever she likes, it doesn't affect me at all. But, this has a large effect on Master Fanny's reputation. Everyone will surely think that Master Fanny's life is a bit unclean, particularly since you're her student. Perhaps the school authorities will keep an eye on her or something like that." Lisa frowned as she reminded Han Shuo. Han Shuo was suddenly enlightened after Lisa's words. He suddenly felt that he really was very selfish in only thinking of himself and never considering Fanny's position. Just as Han Shuo was inwardly berating himself, Jean walked into the classroom with a thick stack of magic books. He swept his gaze around the room when he entered and saw Han Shuo sitting in the back row. His face suddenly chilled. The class had just begun when Jean suddenly stopped and looked at Han Shuo in the back with an evil smile. "Brian, you've never attended class since you became a necromancy major student. Is the knowledge I'm going over too advanced for you? Do you understand what I'm talking about?" After the trials of the Dark Forest, Han Shuo understood that Jean wasn't a bad person. He just made things a bit difficult for Han Shuo because of Fanny, but Jean was still a refined, cultured person. He didn't make life too obviously difficult for Han Shuo, and thus Han Shuo didn't bear a grudge difficult to resolve against Jean. This time, because of those ugly rumors about him and Fanny, Jean must have been eaten alive by the green-eyed monster. This was why he was seizing upon this pretext to embarrass him. "Master Jean, I've learned the knowledge that you're going over when I read books, and have mostly grasped a proper understanding. Therefore, I think I can understand the class lessons. Please don't worry about me." Han Shuo leaned back and said with a slight smile to Jean. "Oh, if you could grasp magic through self-study of books, then why would our Babylon Academy of Magic and Force still exist? Heh, since this is the case, I'll ask you this. How many ways can magic be cast?" They can be divided into the four ways: incantations, magical items, hand seals, and magical matrices. Incantations use words to communicate with the magical elements in order to reach the purpose of release magic. Magical items include scrolls. Han Shuo retained his lazy posture and smoothly reeled off a bunch of definitions, including some of his own reflections. Jean was noticeably surprised by his words. He started slightly at first and then nodded. Very good, it looks like you already know all the basic knowledge within the books. Then I'll ask you some more questions. Jean frowned and then asked Han Shuo a series of questions. He started with the most foundational magical knowledge, and then started asking points that only novice mages would be able to grasp. Han Shuo spoke fluidly, explaining the answers to all of these questions. Jean and the other students within the classroom all looked at Han Shuo with faces full of surprise throughout this process. It seemed that they hadn't thought that Han Shuo could fully grasp so much knowledge this deeply in such a short amount of time. Traces of sweat shone on Jean's forehead as he appeared a bit agitated. He then snorted lightly and asked another question. I don't know how to answer this. Han Shuo blanked and answered honestly. This question had surpassed the knowledge that a journeyman mage would know, and he truly didn't understand it. Jean finally smiled and was about to say a few words to regain face when Lisa said impatiently, Master Jean, if he knew the answers to everything, then what would be the point of coming to your lectures? Lisa's words stopped him in his tracks when he heard them. Jean obviously felt a bit awkward and slapped the table with a dry laugh. All right then, I won't keep asking. Let's continue with class. How come you suddenly know so much? Lisa retracted her head as she asked Han Shuo in a low voice. Didn't I tell you earlier? I asked Master Fanny about all this. Otherwise, how would that old witch Camilla have material to spread rumors with? Han Shuo responded and started listening to class seriously. Some of the material that Jean was currently going over included some of the journeyman mage knowledge, which was something that Han Shuo still needed to grasp. This was why Han Shuo didn't harbor ill feelings towards Jean's jealousy. Lisa seemed to still want to chat with Han Shuo after class, but Han Shuo didn't give her the chance to as he immediately headed over to Fanny's lab after class. Fitch, I've already explained this magic many times. I think with your powers of comprehension you should have understood this long ago. Why can you still not successfully cast it? Han Shuo's sensitive ears allowed him to clearly hear the conversation inside as he stood outside the laboratory doors. Master Fanny, I think you're well aware of my feelings, but why don't you give me any chances and would rather be with that lowly errand slave? Why? Fitch's strong complaints traveled out from inside. Han Shuo pulled the door open slightly and could clearly see Fitch's furious face. Master Fanny wore black-rimmed glasses and a demure, regulation-style magic robe. A look of resignation appeared on her face as she sighed, Fitch, I've become more and more disappointed in you. First of all, Brian is the same as you now, one of my students. You shouldn't treat him as an errand slave anymore. In addition, I've noticed that you've never focused your concentration whenever you come to me with a question. You're always distracted and I have no idea what you're thinking of. Brian is much better than you when it comes to stuff like this. Brian again, in what way is that damned errand slave better than me? Why are you willing to be with him, but unwilling to give me any chances? Is the witch Camilla really speaking the truth, and you really did sleep with him with no sense of shame? The fury on Fitch's face grew as he suppressed his voice, almost roaring as he spoke. Pa! Fanny flung a slap at Fitch. She was truly incensed, an uncommon occurrence. She looked at Fitch with cold eyes and said, I think I have nothing further to say to you. I told you before that we could only talk about matters of the heart once you'd advanced to the level of adept mage in order to encourage you, but now I see that not everything is all right with you. I can tell you clearly that there is no possibility of anything developing between us. I hope you can let go of all illusions. If you still have questions regarding magic in the future, please come find me within the training fields or the classroom. You are no longer welcome in my laboratory. Please leave immediately. So you've been lying to me all along. Haha. Good. Very good. You wanted me to reach the level of adept mage first before discussing matters of the heart, but that errant slave Brian has already become an exception for you. Hypocritical shameless woman, I'll never believe you again. Fitch held his face as he laughed ghastly, walking outside of the laboratory. Han Shuo backed up a few steps and hid himself in the corner until Fitch had left. He looked coldly at Fitch's passing figure, paused for a moment, and then walked into Fanny's laboratory with a natural expression. Han Shuo saw that Fanny was a bit lost in thought as he walked towards her. She propped herself up listlessly on the round table with her two hands, sighing lightly with a lowered head. She murmured to herself with an exceedingly weak voice. Perhaps Fitch is right, I really am a hypocritical, shameless woman. I seem to have truly violated some principles. Han Shuo clearly heard all of Fanny's low murmurs, but he didn't understand the meaning behind her words and didn't know who her words were intended for. After thinking for a while, Han Shuo cocked a finger and rapped on the surface of the round table. Get out of here. Fanny suddenly lifted her hand and glared at Han Shuo. When she saw that the person in front of her had turned into Han Shuo, her expression became very odd. She first blanked and then started in shock, her eyes seemed like they wanted to hide something. Her expression finally went back to normal and she rolled her eyes, obviously in a bad temper, at Han Shuo. What are you doing here? Nothing much, I just have a few questions to ask you. Han Shuo looked oddly at Fanny and responded. What did you hear? Did you see everything just now? Fanny's charming features changed as she suddenly glared at Han Shuo. Your ears are so perverse that you must have heard everything. Don't you know that eavesdropping is very rude? I didn't want to listen in, but they all landed in my ears. I didn't have any choice either. Han Shuo spread out his hands like a rascal, indicating that he really hadn't meant to. His expression then turned grave as he turned to Fanny and said seriously, that Camilla really is very evil. I don't mind, but she's slandered you and negatively impacted your reputation. Do you intend to let her off the hook like this? Forgot it, the old witch is just like that. There's nothing between us anyways, what other people say have nothing to do with us. The more we explain, the more they'll think we have a guilty conscience. Let's just ignore them since people of moral integrity do not fear slanderous attacks. Fanny sighed lowly as she too seemed a bit worried, but spoke peace-making words. But I have a guilty conscience. Han Shuo said with a wry expression. Damn it, what do you feel guilty about? Fanny's charming face blushed hotly all of a sudden, but her expression was infuriated as she lowered her head and cursed lowly at Han Shuo. It's because of my mistake that's caused other people to misunderstand you so. I feel that I have wronged you and so, of course I feel guilty. Han Shuo explained with a poker face. Fanny started slightly and then reacted afterwards, saying huffily, so this is what you meant by guilty conscience. I thought you meant something else. What other meaning is there? Han Shuo asked. No, nothing. Fanny hastily responded like she wanted to cover something up, and then immediately changed the topic and asked Han Shuo. What questions do you have for me this time? Han Shuo had been about to open his mouth to answer when he suddenly felt someone approaching. He didn't respond and looked to the door instead. After a while, Han Shuo saw the Wind Archmage Duke walk into Fanny's room with a benevolent smile. Master Fanny, are you free today? I'd like to ask you a few more questions. Duke smiled and greeted Fanny after entering the room. His brow then furrowed as he turned to look at Han Shuo. Han Shuo was startled, but kept a very normal expression on his face, looking at Duke with an expression of surprise and confusion, like it was the first time he'd seen Duke and wanted to know about his origins and background. Chapter 89. An odd phenomenon in the molded spirit realm. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Mr. Duke, you're too polite. Go ahead and ask whatever you'd like to know. Fanny passed a chair to Duke and smiled faintly. Duke glanced over Han Shua's body and then naturally looked back at Fanny, as if not minding Han Shua at all. He didn't take the chair that Fanny passed over and only said politely, "I won't be sitting, I'm just here to ask you a small question. I'll leave after I've asked it. Master Fanny, you've studied necromancy magic all this time. Have you ever heard of the Eye of Darkness?" On the side, Han Shua silently observed Duke and noticed that after he said these words, his gaze was tightly fixed on Fanny, as if was trying to glean some clues from Fanny's facial expression. Shaking her head, Fanny's expression was perplexed as she asked Duke instead, "What is this Eye of Darkness? Does it have something to do with the necromancy major?" Heh, it's just a small tool. I'm not too certain of the specifics either, that's why I wanted to ask you. Since you don't know as well, forget about it. My apologies for disturbing you. Duke wore a gentle smile having delivered this line after entering through the door. He nodded towards Fanny and walked towards the door again. When he reached the door, he seemed to suddenly thought of something again and asked carelessly, "Oh right. Master Fanny, I've heard that the library of your necromancy major is shared with the dark majors. The necromancy major was once greater than the dark major many years ago. Do you not have your own stand-alone library?" Mr. Duke, you've said so yourself that it was many years ago when the necromancy major was at its peak. The magics that necromancers can now grasp are limited and there aren't that many books on display. Fanny laughed lightly and then paused. She said indifferently, "Oh, right, I've heard that there's a secret library within our school. There are forbidden texts from all the various majors within that library, preserved secretly with authorization from the Empire. I've only heard about it from one of the other teachers and have never known where this secret library was hidden." "I see, then I'll be taking my leave. I'll be taking up residence within your academy for the immediate future. May I inconvenience you with any other questions I may have? I'll be happy to be of service." It looked like Duke hadn't recognized Han Shua. The former hadn't paid any attention to Han Shua after his initial glance when he walked into room. Han Shua rejoiced inwardly after Duke left. "All right, what questions do you have?" Fanny flicked a glance at Han Shua after Duke left and asked with ill temper. His space ring lit up faintly. Han Shua brought out the questions that he'd previously organized. He sat down naturally in the chair that Duke hadn't occupied just now, and started with his first question. As an adept necromancer, Fanny had a very complete grasp of theoretical knowledge. Questions that had troubled Han Shua for quite some time were all easily resolved through Fanny's explanations. Summoning zombies is a bit more troublesome than skeletons because the volume and weight of zombies are greater. You'll need to expend more mental strength when summoning them. In addition to this, controlling zombies is also more complicated than skeletons. The bodies of zombies are much more durable than skeletons. If you wish to agilely control them, you must practice repeatedly. Fanny's voice was gentle as she concentrated on pointing out a few things to take note of when summoning zombies. When Fanny finished explaining, Han Shua's brow knit fiercely together as he sank into a state of contemplation. Fanny didn't make a sound as to not disturb Han Shua when she saw that he was deep in thought. After a while, Han Shua exhaled easily and smiled, so it was an issue of insufficient coordination between the deployment and retrievement of mental strength. I've grown accustomed to summoning skeletons and am used to using the same amount of strength to communicate across the other dimension. It looks like this was the core of the problem. I think I understand now. After those words, Han Shua started reciting the incantation to summon zombies again within Fanny's vision. When the first incantation finished, the figure of a zombie flashed through the air and then immediately disappeared. Han Shua wasn't in a hurry as he tried to control the amount of his mental strength, but still hadn't succeeded after 4 or 5 tries. Fanny's face wore a gratified smile as she watched Han Shua. She understood that Han Shuo had already understood the meaning of her words and was searching for the appropriate amount of mental strength through practice. Once he felt the proper amount of mental strength, he would be able to completely summon a zombie. Never mind it, you don't need to practice for now. Your direction is definitely correct, and you just lack a bit of repeated practice. I think you'll be able to fully grasp the magic of summoning zombies when you are able to fully control your mental strength. Brian, it's only been 2 or 3 months, yet you've already reached the level of novice mage. I've never heard of such speed in all my years of teaching in the necromancy major. Then how do I compare to Fitch? Han Shuo temporarily gave up further practice beneath Fanny's encouragement and chuckled honestly as he looked at her. It feels so unnatural to see your honestly smiling face. Don't act dumb in front of me anymore. Oh, I'd forgotten about Fitch until you mentioned him. He seems very off right now. I'm worried that he'll hold a grudge and purposely create trouble for you. Be careful. Fanny first rebuked Han Shuo, and then spoke to him with a tone of concern. Don't worry, if Fitch is really that gullible, I think the person who would end up worse off will surely be him. Han Shuo shrugged his shoulders and paid Fitch's grudge no mind. To be honest, he really didn't think much of the journeyman mage Fitch now. Brian, I knew that you'd be here, come here. Master Fanny, I have a few matters to discuss with him, hee. Lisa's voice traveled in from outside at this moment as she walked towards Han Shuo as soon as she came in. She grabbed Han Shuo's wrist and dragged him outside. As Fanny watched Han Shuo get pulled away by Lisa, a bit of anger seemed to grow out of nowhere in her heart. It was as if someone had seized something precious to her, and she didn't feel quite happy about it. How do you know my cousin? Lisa asked as she dragged Han Shuo to a little courtyard behind the school library. Han Shuo liberated his shoulder from Lisa's hand and looked at her in confusion. Your cousin? Who is he? Lawrence. He's learning martial arts in our martial arts school. He came looking for you previously, but you weren't here. Who would have thought that he'd immediately come looking for you as soon as you'd returned this time? How do you know him? So it was him. This Lawrence was a bit odd. He had the same master as Phoebe, but attended class at the academy. Also, he currently possessed the strength of a journeyman swordsman. Han Shuo weighed all of this privately. As he lowered his head, Han Shuo happened to see Lisa's chest next to him. Her chest had originally been quite flat, but now blossomed into shapely curves. The well-rounded look noticeably illustrated that she had quite a figure. Lisa, are you wearing more clothes than usual today? Why do I get the feeling that you filled out quite nicely? Han Shuo snuck a glance at Lisa's chest and unknowingly let these words slip. What do you mean by that? Lisa had been walking when she heard Han Shuo's words. She was so startled that she almost fell over. Her little face then reddened as she stared at Han Shuo with her question. Your chest was flat before, with nothing there, but now it looks bumpy. Did you pad it with something? Han Shuo thought internally, but his words were directly reflected in his speech. He opened his mouth and responded with this incredibly honest internal dialogue. Extraordinary rage. Lisa glared vehemently at Han Shuo and reached out her small hand and gave Han Shuo a firm pinch. She gritted her teeth and said, You said such a thing and now suspect that I've padded my chest. Do you want to die? Han Shuo was horrified as he suddenly realized what he said. He thought those words had only stayed in his heart just now, and according to his modus operandi, he would have only kept them in his heart. He would never have caused so much trouble for himself by voicing thoughts that would only anger the other person. But who could have known that reality would be so strange? It was his inner thoughts, but Han Shuo hadn't given any thought to the consequences and just let it all out. This made Han Shuo feel exceedingly odd. At the same time, a strand of cool sensation suddenly suffused with his mind. Han Shuo's body shuddered slightly, and he then understood why such words slipped out from him before. It must be because the magical Yuan had started creating some strange phenomenon after entering the molded spirit stage. He smiled wryly at Lisa with her teeth gritted as he calmed himself down inside. He privately admonished himself to be careful and to not say anything random again. He finally laughed dryly at Lisa. "I'm sorry Lisa, I was just joking with you. I hadn't thought that you really started developing. I'm truly happy for you. You're such a bad person to say such things to someone." Lisa immediately blushed and explained in a low voice, "I should be the one thanking you instead. I followed the methods that you prescribed." This is so embarrassing. Anyways, that's what happened." Shaking his head in silent laughter, Han Shuo had completely forgotten the ways he'd imparted onto Lisa before for developing her breasts. Who would have thought that they would actually have an effect? This made Han Shuo feel rather awkward and put on the spot. "Hi Brian, how are you?" At this moment, Lawrence happened to see Han Shuo and Lisa from across the courtyard and greeted them from afar. Lisa hastily took in a few breaths to calm her reddened face and snuck a glance at Han Shuo, saying softly, "Lawrence's father is a great finance minister of the empire. He is on very friendly terms with His Majesty. It will benefit you greatly if you have increased contact with him. I won't be disturbing you then." Lisa seemed to be greatly afraid of Lawrence seeing her reddened face, and after saying these words she fled towards the training fields with small running steps. The son of one of the empire's finance ministers. Han Shuo gave a slight start as he thought privately that the academy was indeed full of hidden dragons and crouching tigers. It would seem that many future nobles would be training in the various majors of the academy. "I'm quite good. I've heard that you came looking for me twice." "Heh, were you planning on spending 5 gold coins for me to get beaten by you all day?" There wasn't only Han Shuo and Lawrence in the courtyard, there was also a few students from other majors in the distance, reading books in groups of 2 or 3 or leisurely tanning themselves in the sunlight. "If you're willing to, I don't mind spending another 5 gold coins, but I think you would definitely not be willing now." Lawrence leaned against a stone railing and was quite at ease as he spoke to Han Shuo. "Who says I'm not willing? The only thing is I don't need 5 gold coins. As long as you're willing to let me fight back, I'll agree to practicing with you. I was beaten up quite severely by you last time and really want to save face." Han Shuo smiled faintly and also leaned leisurely against the railing as he spoke to Lawrence with an interested expression. "Oh, that's not a problem. I can practice with you after we've concluded our business here and see if you're really as strong as Phoebe says." Lawrence also looked quite interested as he stood up straight and smiled. "All right then, I'd like to hear what business you have with me. The two of us shouldn't have any interaction at all, so what have you come to discuss with me?" Looking around, Lawrence kept his voice down when he discovered that no one was paying them any attention. He looked at Han Shuo with bright eyes. "My little junior sister said that you seem to be able to get your hands on black iron ore. If this is truly the case, I'd like to purchase some from you. It doesn't have to be much, just an amount at the size of a fist will do. I was going to ask little junior sister to buy some for me, but I felt that since we got to know each other last time and I'm truly curious about you, I'd like to be friends, so I've come to find you myself." Han Shuo looked at the very sincere Lawrence and thought that since he was the son of a great finance minister for the empire, he must have a lot of money.